and some final negotiation on the Palestinian refugee issue and on what would happen with East Jerusalem. And Arafat flew around in a fucking plane for 2 weeks, ignoring everything until Ehud Barak was basically lost his next election. And he was like, "Oh, well, let's see what the next guy wants." And that's been the story of the Palestinians ever since.
We'll talk about
no random shit.
No, that's fine.
What happened.
We'll talk about Ehud Barak right now because a lot of that was not true. And then going back to what you said about here's the difference with Netanyahu, right? When you said that Nasser said that we're going to destroy them or blah blah blah. Here's the big difference. When these Arabs said the things that they said it in public in front of everybody. What I'm talking about with Ben Gurion saying that he's never going to agree, he's going to always expand and create a state of Israel and go ahead and take all the Arab land, he did that in private. And when Benjamin Netanyahu, when he said what he said, and the West Bank saying that I sabotage the Oslo Accords and they'll never have a two-state solution, he said that in private too. Hold on. Let me just finish. Let me finish what I'm saying. The difference is this. He said this to his son, not expecting those letters to become public. And then Netanyahu said that stuff to those people in the West Bank, not expecting that to be public. So what they say in private is what they really want. The politicians, you're talking about Nasser saying, oh, they're going to destroy them, they're going to destroy them. That's fine. That's political posturing. He's saying it in front of everybody. That it is what it is. But what these guys said in private was their real intention. So I believe them because that's what they said in private, not expecting to be recorded. So that's different. And then also with the Six-Day War, remember, the Israelis started that one.
Why would they do Oslo
Israelis started that war.
Why did they do Oslo 1 at all then?
Because he didn't think that Yitzhak Rabin will be assassinated by a Likud party member? He couldn't foresee that?
No, why did Israel do? Why did Israel agree? If Israel's always just wanted to expand and always wanted to take all the territory, why would they even do Oslo 1?
Well, I'm referring to Benjamin Netanyahu and Ben Gurion in particular.
So then the other half of Israel doesn't want to do it? So it's just some Israeli leadership that wants to expand and not the other part of Israeli leadership?
Well, I know for a fact Ben Gurion and Netanyahu, we know what they said to their private counterparts, what their intentions were.
You believe that Rabin and Barak, they legitimately did want peace with Palestinians? Then why didn't the peace happen? If Arafat was there negotiating the other end the whole time?
Here's the thing. I don't have access to their private stuff, so I don't know. But what I will say with Yitzhak Rabin is he came the closest to actually doing something, even though he didn't concede barely anything. And they killed him for even conceding a little bit.
But there was no deal to concede to. Arafat didn't lay out anything ever in particular that he wanted for any final agreement.
The plan
he was always happy to kick the can down the road.
The plan was always a two-state solution and right to self-determination. That was always the plan. They were working towards it.
That was the plan. That's not true. Even the majority of people, I don't know today, but historically don't even agree on wanting a two-state solution. That's like a Western concept of a plan.
That's why Clinton was facilitating it. Yes, you're right. It is a Western plan. That's why Clinton was in the middle of brokering the Oslo Accords. It was Clinton's idea to bring them together and do this. Now, with that said, whether it's a two-state solution or a one-state solution, the point is this: what Arafat wanted was a Palestinian sovereignty and right to self-determination. That's the bottom line. And I would argue that the Oslo Accords,
infinite right of return to Israel proper, infinite right of return for all millions of refugees.
That never got put on paper, so we don't know. We don't know. But I know
that's my argument. Nothing got put on paper with Arafat. Nothing was put on paper
because they wouldn't. Because the Israelis would not agree to that, dude.
So he didn't put it on paper to show them rejecting it? Why would you not do that?
Because, again, the Israelis had all the leverage, they had all the power. Clinton brought them together so they can go ahead and make some kind of peace.
No, you put something on paper so that you can go to the international community and go, hey, this is what we would accept, and Israel turned it down.
The Israelis never accept anything in the international community. They break international law every single day, bro. They literally break international law every single day.
They literally did. They accepted Resolution 181. They accepted the petition. You're going to say it's unfair. That's fine. But Israel will accept things. You're just saying that they're doing it in bad faith, but we can't ever prove that because Arabs are always constantly ready to make war with them regardless. So,
no, I proved the bad faith with Ben Gurion's letters and Netanyahu getting this guy killed.
That's not proving it. That's trying to establish a counterfactual that there's no possible way. Show me the Arab letters. By the way, you can't because none of their archives are even available for us to go through. I can't go through Cairo's archives to see, what that leadership was talking about. I can't go through Syrian, Damascus fucking archives or fucking archives in Beirut or archives in what the fuck is the name of the Jordanian capital?
That's fine. We're in an impasse.
I can't even visit. Well, no, wait, hold on. But I'm just saying that you're going through and you're cherry picking single lines, single statements or whatever out of Ben Gurion to try to prove that the whole Jewish project was going to be a massive backstep. Even though Ben Gurion didn't even know he would have been the first prime minister, even though Ben Gurion would have no idea how politically successful he'd be in the future, and even though by your own words somebody like Rabin could exist who would genuinely want peace with the Arabs, so that disproves it right there that Israel would have always been on some expansionist pathway. Meanwhile, on the Arab side, there is no deal on the table that Israel has walked away from. There are deals that Arafat walked away from.
Okay, so again, we're talking about a huge time span. You're going from Ben Gurion, the first prime minister,
because you brought up Ben Gurion quote.
Because I'm saying that there were prime ministers that were in power that obviously had no intention of ever giving the Palestinians anything, and we have proof of this with Netanyahu and with Ben Gurion. I don't have proof for Yitzhak Rabin not wanting to do any type of peace, so I got to go off of what he did.
The Jews accepted 181. That's what they did. They accepted 181, right? They did accept it, right? You're saying they would have accepted it in the future, but they did accept it, right?
You're talking about the Oslo Accords?
No. In 47 and 48, they accepted Resolution 181. They would have accepted that partition plan.
That partition plan I told you before. Well, again, Ben Gurion was in power during that time.
If he would have accepted, the Jews accepted that partition plan. It was the Arabs that refused it. You can say it was unfair, whatever.
It was
fine,
unfair. It was unfair. Why would they accept it?
But the Jews accepted it, and the Arabs didn't. And the Arabs didn't put a counter proposal. The Arabs didn't counter with anything because, despite what you guys want to say in the West now, there was zero place for any kind of Jewish state in that land. It's not like they said, hold on, well, 55%. I know they're going to say it's 100 years. 55% is unfair. We wanted it to be 22%. No, there was 0% would have been accepted. That's why there's no counter proposal ever, and that's why on the heels of 181, when that proposal was issued and the Jews accepted it, the Palestinians went to war immediately. They were like, fuck this, civil war, we're kicking them all out. If they would have won that war, they wouldn't have left them with Jaffa, or they wouldn't have left them with, 10% or 1% or whatever. They would have expelled all of them.
Well, the thing is, again, is that at the end of the day, they came in, they were killing, they were stealing their land, they were doing a whole bunch of bullshit, and then they said, oh yeah, let's go ahead and negotiate. What if somebody came to your house and took 50% and said, yeah, let's negotiate? You'd be like, no, get the fuck out. And you'd want them to get them the fuck out of there.
They wanted 50% after the bank repos my house because I failed to pay my mortgage? Well, it's not really my house anymore. The Arabs that lived in the Levant didn't own that. It was the Ottoman Empire territory, and the Ottoman Empire had collapsed after World War I. It wasn't all their territory. They didn't buy it. They never paid for it. They didn't have any deeds showing ownership.
Well, it wasn't the Israelis either.
AFK landowners.
It didn't belong to the Israelis either.
Land. That's where they moved people
they
there.
only own 6%. They only own 6%.
Yeah, and the Arabs only had deeds to show for like 10 or 11%.
Well, they still own more, even if we're going to go off that number.
Fine, but they didn't own the 100% or whatever you seem to think that they did. Or
well, they were there first. They were there first, Destiny. These colonial guys came from Eastern Europe. Like, it's that simple. Like, it was their house.
They were there.
It was their house.
They lost the war. They lost. Like, if they would have invaded, the territories of the prior caliphate expanded and receded depending upon, how their conquest was going. That's how it worked. And they lost the war. They lost that country. The rights to the land belonged to the British. It was the British mandate for Palestine, and it was up to the British to decide what they wanted to do with it. They made promises to the Jews.
Again,
the Arabs lived there too.
Remember, the debate is, it's not about who won the war, who lost the war. I'm not disputing the fact that they lost the war. I'm saying that the Israelis are a bigger obstacle to peace because they gave a bullshit plan, right? Expecting that the Palestinians would take it when they were just a minority and they only own 6% of the land. Why the hell would you agree to something like that? Like, that's not even
agree, but that means you're not you're still the obstacle to peace then. Put a counter proposal. This is the thing that hurts the Arabs the most, the Palestinians the most, is there's not a single time in all of history. I can at least point to bullshit Jewish plans and say, oh, well, look, the Jews would have at least accepted that, even though it's bullshit. The Palestinians cannot point to a single plan where they go, look, we were going to accept that. Look, we
I told you Oslo Accords. I told you Oslo was the closest. Oslo was the closest, even though it was bullshit.
It was not a peace plan. It was a framework to move them in that direction.
Yes.
But there are no peace plans that the Jews walked away from that were left on the table by the Palestinians, because the Palestinians were always under the delusion that they could expel every single Jew, and they could never do it. And by the time they lost, like, their 12th war, they were like, okay, well, can we go back to, like, the agreement we had on our 5th war? And then go back to that. But by then, you're fucked.
Dude, the Israelis are such an obstacle to peace that the Oslo Accords, which was the closest thing, a framework, again, I agree with you. It was a framework towards some type of peace. The Israelis are such an obstacle, they killed one of their own to stop the fucking peace deal.
They killed one of their own. Yes. Hafez in Syria was worried about being assassinated by one of his own. That's why they didn't even make peace with Israel forever, because they were worried about killing by their own. Sadat had already been killed by their own. The king of Jordan had been killed by a Palestinian in Jerusalem.
We're not talking about these countries. We're talking about Israel.
Hold on.
We're talking about Israel.
Arafat was worried about being killed by one of his own as well. All of these people were worried about being killed by one of their own. It's a fucking region.
Okay.
Enemies.
Sure.
He's worried about getting killed.
Sure, but here's the difference. Israel claims to be a democracy, to be the only democracy in the Middle East.
And that's why you have leaders like
they're different.
Who died because they made that sacrifice for peace. Ehud Barak knew that he faced the same risk, and he was worried about getting assassinated too.
And that's why he gave a bullshit deal. And that's why I gave a bullshit deal. And we'll talk about Rock next.
But then when I ask you, well, what was the good deal that Arafat left on the table? You have nothing. There's nothing you can point to. There's nothing at all.
I just told you. I told you.
What?
Okay. Again, let's go through this. Oslo Accords.
No. What was the deal that Arafat left on the table?
He recognized that Israelis. He recognized that it denounced violence.
That's part of the Oslo 1. He didn't even denounce violence.
Yes, he did. In Oslo 1, he denounced violence. 100%.
Yeah, they said it. They said that. But Oslo 1 was not a. If you want to point to Oslo 1 as an example, then the Jews accepted that as well. Then now you're equal.
But that's my point. Oslo 1 got sabotaged because the Jews killed their own guy. That's my point.
It did. Oslo 2 came after. It wasn't
all right, let's go ahead and go for it. Let's go to camp then. Let's go to Camp David 2000.
Oslo
all right.
1 carried on after Rabin's death.
Yeah, it carried on, but it didn't carry on the way it was supposed to carry on, where they were going to come. They were revisited.
Because they wanted to revisit it because that's how Arafat works.
He got killed a year later.
Yeah, and Oslo too, and the Hebron redeployment happened after Rabin died. It still carried on. There's still a Palestinian Authority to this day. There's still Area ABC to this day. It still exists.
Yeah, but it was never supposed to last that long is the point. The terms of the deal got destroyed. Yeah, rightfully so, because the terms didn't go as agreed.
There was no final deal.
So Camp David.
There was no. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned a guy named Shlomo Ben-Amin, which I find interesting because he even admitted that that deal was bullshit, and he said, I wouldn't have accepted if I was a Palestinian either. And he was one of the negotiators alongside your boy Ehud Barak, so he admitted that.
I'm aware. I know this quote. I literally asked this guy about this quote. I'm aware. All he's saying is that they were able to push for a stronger deal at the Taba summit. But the thing that undermines that quote is that at Camp David, he said that the Palestinians were right to walk away from it, but then at Taba summit, where they got even more offered, they walked away from that too.
Well,
so apparently there was never any strategic mind there. But because they never accepted anything.
That summit that you're talking about with Clinton, the deals were already cooked at that point. He was trying to save face and get his legacy, but we'll go into there. Yeah, it was cooked at that point.
The deals were cooked because Arafat was never going to agree to anything, and they started to realize that. That's where the frustrations were mounting on, because after Camp David, the Palestinians accepted nothing. There was nothing on the table. You would always get the vaguest, bullshitest answers. They didn't accept the Clinton parameters, even though the Jews did, and then they go to Taba Summit for the last-ditch negotiation, and Arafat's looking at Barak like, you got an election coming up, motherfucker, and then just, kicked his feet back and chilled, flew around the world in a jet for a while to the embarrassment of the rest of the Arab world, and then sat back and watched as the second intifada erupted all over the country of Israel.
All right, let's go through why it was a bullshit deal. Instead of complaining about it, let me go through why they didn't accept that. And even one of the Israelis that you're mentioning here admitted that the Palestinians were right to walk away from it. So number one.
From Camp David, not the Taba Summit.
Yeah,
Camp David.
I'm talking about Camp David. This was the original deal. So first, Ehud Barak says, oh yeah, we're going to give you, we're going to concede with 91% of the West Bank. But the problem is that they didn't use the international community's definition of the West Bank. They gave their own bullshit definition of the West Bank, which didn't cover a bunch of the areas that were important: No Man's Land, East Jerusalem, Red Sea territories, etc. Also, so the deal was cut from the beginning. It wasn't the full 91 like they claimed, because it didn't cover a lot of the settlement areas. Also, they left out...
Point by point, just to correct that. It has nothing to do with 91%. You're talking about land swaps, okay?
Yes.
What you're actually talking about is that they want 91%, 97%, 100%. When they came in, Arafat had no clue what he wanted. The Jews thought it's just some percentage thing, but the reality is what they really needed to negotiate on was what you hit on the second point there, where the holy sites. That was way more important than any type of 91, 95, 97% land swap. But the holy site thing, the Arafat side never even touched that. They never made any strong claims about what they wanted there, and that was an unanswered question. And a lot of people do point to the lack of specificity around holy sites for why nothing came from Camp David.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If they can't even negotiate for continuity in their region where everything is fragmented and they barely have any type of authority, they're not in a position to negotiate for the religious side.
They would have had continuity. That's an easy thing to do. Continuity was never the big deal.
No, that's huge, because if they don't have continuity, then how are they going to go ahead and be able to establish trade? How are they going to be able to travel properly? Everything is fragmented. There's travel.
It's only fragmented right now because of the relic of Oslo 1 and 2. But the continuity would be given if they actually had a state. The idea behind Oslo 1 was that Area A and B would be fully handed over to them eventually, and then lots of Area C would be handed over to them as well.
And that never happened because the settlements kept expanding, which are illegal, by the way. The whole international community, it literally says that the settlements are illegal.
Oslo 2 died with the Second Intifada.
The settlements are illegal, bro. Like, there's no way around that. Everybody knows that. Settlements are 1,000% illegal.
Ask Destiny, Steven, do you think the settlements are illegal?
I don't think it matters. It's not relevant.
That's not even... now the international community doesn't matter. We were talking about the UN and the GA all this time, and now international law doesn't matter. And that's the problem with the Israelis.
Wait. When have I ever cited international law as being competitive for any of these deals?
You were talking about we were talking about the Peel Commission. Then we were talking about the 242.
The
Then we talked about the 1967.
To the existence of the UN, and the Peel Commission wasn't determinative of anything. It was just a finding on what was happening. You're talking about 67. You're talking about peace or whatever. You yourself just said that Resolution 242 is bullshit. So, and we agree on that, right? And the phrasing was kind of vague. When you talk about Egypt and Jordan and Israel, you agreed. It wasn't the UN that caused it. It was the U.S. paying both sides a lot of fucking money. So yes, the international community is not very relevant when it comes to dealing with peace in this region. It's always because there are leaders in the region that are trying to take big steps to make it, or because international pressure from some countries or assistance are the ones that are encouraging to take it.
The deal was bad. I'm not saying international law is bullshit. I'm saying that the deal, the partition plan was bullshit. That particular plan was not fair.
That's fine.
For the Palestinians whatsoever.
International law doesn't mean anything to any of the players in this region until they want to wield it as a weapon against somebody else.
Well,
fucking Assad and the Houthis in Yemen and the Muslim Brotherhood. These people don't give a fuck about UN international fucking law. None of these people.
It's crazy.
International law.
Well, I'll tell you this: they break the international law less than the Israelis do, which is kind of crazy because the Israelis are supposed to be democracy and we're the most moral army.
I seriously.
And they're the occupying force. As the occupying force, they're held to a way higher standard, right?
You think you think Israel breaks international law more than Assad did in Syria? More than Hezbollah does in Lebanon? More than the Houthis do Contra law in Yemen?
You can make the argument that the Israelis break international law more than these rogue terrorist organizations. Yeah, you can make that argument.
Well, given that the death toll is like 10x or more from all these other regions, then...
Dude, Israel's doing a genocide right now as we speak. They're doing a genocide right now.
Yeah, because Arabs genocide
like,
other Arabs. Because Arabs don't genocide other Arabs. It's never considered that way. There's not enough votes in the UN to ever say that there's a genocide going on amongst any of these other Arabs, Arab on Arab violence. It's just not considered. But I mean, yeah, if you want to call it a genocide, that's fine.
It is a genocide.
More children died in Yemen than like total
For
Palestinians have died. More children died of starvation in Yemen than more children have fucking died in the entire Israeli-Gaza war.
I'm
like,
one of the
Sudan,
few.
it's like over 500,000 people dead. In fucking Syria, it was like 500,000 people dead. The Iraq-Iran war saw 1 million people dead.
Sure.
Like, yeah, there's a ton of death that happens. That's
Sure.
great if we want to like throw around international law here, but it's not solving anything.
Well,
Right?
here's the thing.
242 came in 67, and we're not any closer to a fucking solution,
Here's
right?
the thing. I've a million times shit on the Gulf states. I talked about Sudan, all this other stuff where we have all these conflicts in the Middle East, and obviously the Gulf states not helping and or contributing to it. But the reality is that there is a genocide being done right now by the Israelis on the people in Gaza. We can sit here and deflect and be like, well, look at the rest of the Arab world. That's fine. I totally acknowledge that. But the reality is that we have a full-fledged genocide going on right now. But the Israelis are supposed to be the most moral army. They're supposed to be, and they're the occupiers. So obviously they're held to a higher standard. So a whole bunch of shit.
Why doesn't Hamas just release the hostages then?
Okay, sure. We can go ahead and discuss that because that's a whole other.
Let's just move to.
You don't want to.
Well, no, I just want to hear that because that would immediately take the wind out of the sails of any kind of moral authority Israel has to continue the war. Why wouldn't Hamas just release the hostages? Say, oh fuck us, we're not winning this. Like we're just releasing the hostages.
Okay, so are we gonna do this or Camp David? Because this is gonna go into a whole other thing if I go into this Hamas.
We can do. I can say your answer to this. And we'll go to Camp David.
Well, if I answer this, I know you're gonna want to keep going. I promise we'll come to this. We'll come to this. Yeah. All right. Let me just go through Camp David. Right. So. Also, the Camp David Accords, of course, it allowed them to keep the best land that was fertile. They had the strategic high ground, key waterways. Israel would control the border with Jordan, which obviously would undermine their ability to have some sovereignty or do any type of economic trade. Also, they were demilitarized, as we know, no military whatsoever, still occupied. They would have a lightly armed police force, but we know that's not nothing. And then obviously. The Israelis would control everything else. And also another important thing is, according to international law, I know you say you don't care about international law, but transferring civilians to occupied territory is illegal under 49 of the Geneva Convention. So even with Ehud Barak's deal here, he was still violating international law. So this deal was complete bullshit. And then I know you're going to want to mention the whole Clinton thing. The Clinton situation, the Clinton summit was basically like, hey, I'm trying to come in and save my own legacy, but he didn't really consult with the Israelis or the Palestinians whatsoever, because at that point it was already, shit hit the bed with the Intifada. So whatever. But we could fast forward.
But the Clinton parameters were before the Intifada, the second Intifada. The Clinton parameters were an attempt to save Camp David because no final agreement was reached with Camp David.
Yeah.
And then the Clinton parameters rolled into the Taba summit back and forth. But I think Arafat saw the time ticking on Ehud Barak's prime ministership, and then flew around the jet all day.
And also the deal sucked.
To run the clock out on his. It did.
The deal sucked. I mean, I read it out for you. Like they had it was fragmented territory, limited police force.
Fragmented because I know the maps you've seen, but that's just not true. It wouldn't have been fragmented. It would have been contiguous land. In your mind, you're thinking of like some Area A versus BC land. The final deal that they would have made. Would have had not only would it have been contiguous territory in the West Bank, they would have had a highway that was supposed to have been built between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Like it would literally would have been.
It's not contiguous at all. And then on top of that, settlers get certain roads that Palestinians don't. Palestinians got to go through checkpoints. Settlers don't.
You're talking about the Oslo Accords right now. That's not what it would have been like afterwards.
But the Oslo Accords were still in effect when they brought this Camp David bullshit in, which didn't help.
The Camp David was supposed to supersede the Oslo Accords.
And it didn't. That's my point.
Because they never agreed to anything.
Yeah, but the Oslo was in point.
Hold on, we can't. This is a quick thing, I guess, for the audience, or whatever. Like this is what the map would have looked like. The idea that there was no contiguous offer is just not true. There would have been contiguous land. It would have basically solidified Area A, B, and most of Area C for the Palestinians.
And the settlements were expanding the whole time. They had 60% of the West Bank pretty much with these illegal settlements, and they kept expanding. And on top of that, these settlers are starting fights all the time, beating up on Palestinians, stealing their land.
Like Palestinians themselves wouldn't care to trade away like most of this land on the fringes because you wouldn't even have to trade that big of a percentage. The big disagreements would have been over what to do.
The settlements are on the best land, bro. The big settlements are on the best land.
The best land doesn't matter anymore. People aren't here farming corn. That's not irrelevant. Right now, the relevant disagreements are Holy Land. You can laugh. Okay, but like, so here you go.
All
So
right.
you can laugh. And then here's the ultimate destroyer to your point. What did Arafat offer? What did he say he was going to accept? You have nothing. You have nothing. You lose on this point every single time. You would never be able to give me a counter offer by Arafat because he never wanted to accept anything.
No.
And you could say, well, this deal wasn't good enough. They
This
didn't
deal
like
was
that. Really, show
bullshit.
me that Arafat's words.
I wouldn't take
Show
it
me that
either.
Arafat's words.
I wouldn't take it either.
So what did he? So what would he have taken?
Not that.
Exactly, nothing. You have no idea because he wouldn't. He wanted to fight forever.
Bro, even the Israeli Shlomo himself said I wouldn't take this deal either.
That was in reference to Camp David. That was in reference to Camp David.
Yeah, Camp David was bullshit. The Oslo
Yeah,
Accords.
but then Taba Summit came after, and he
that
walked
didn't
away
do
from Taba
anything.
Summit as well.
It was bullshit.
It was an expansion. No, that was even more concessions made by Israel.
No.
They had, I think by the end of Camp David, they got
those
to like
concessions.
91.
Hold on. Those concessions you're talking about were from Clinton, not from the Israelis.
No,
they were from
the
Clinton.
Israelis.
No, they weren't.
The Clinton parameters were a set of 6 parameters that both sides were basically supposed to sign on to in agreements to do negotiations.
And
The
neither of
Israeli
them
delegation accepted basically all of them.
Clinton
and,
did that on his way out to look cool and say that he was a peacemaker for his legacy. The Israelis and both parties are off on this one. The Israelis and the Palestinians weren't involved in that whatsoever. That was for Clinton's
That's
ego.
not true. The Israeli delegation accepted the Clinton parameters, and Arafat basically walked away from them. And then they went to have a summit, and Arafat again walked away without
The
agreeing on
Israelis did not accept that Clinton parameters.
They did.
They did not.
They did.
They did not. They did not. They definitely did not. They did not. And honestly, even if they did, it doesn't matter because it was a bullshit deal anyway. Like
Yeah, every deal
was
a bullshit deal.
It was
to
a
the
bullshit
Palestinians.
deal.
I'm seeing a trend here. All of the deals are
No,
bullshit.
I told
There's
you.
no deal on the table.
I told you.
What
Oslo
about-
Accords came close. Oslo
What
Accords
about
advanced stuck
Olmert
it
in
out.
2008? Olmert offered more than had ever been offered even at Taba Summit, and Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas walked away from that as well. And he didn't respond until 2010, claiming that he didn't know what the deal would look like. And again, because he saw the writing on the wall for Olmert getting kicked out too.
No,
like,
man,
there's never a deal that the Palestinians will accept.
I told you, Oslo came the closest, and they killed the guy that was the head negotiator in that, and Oslo died.
didn't come the closest.
Oslo died
Oslo
with
was not a
Rabin.
final agreement.
Again, it was a
Oslo was just
framework. Yes.
Yeah, they are still
it was
in.
the
They're
best
locked
framework.
in Oslo today.
It was the best framework, and it was
wasn't a
it was the
was
best.
just
It was the best framework. Number one, it was the best framework, and if Yitzhak Rabin had lived, who knows how far we could have gone? We don't know because Yitzhak Rabin got assassinated, and then Netanyahu came in and sabotaged the Oslos. That's the point.
What final issues would, on the final issues, not just the framework, the actual final issues on refugees, the capital, the borders, what of those would Yasser Arafat have agreed to?
With the whole situation, with the borders and what else?
What deal would he have agreed to?
He agreed to the Oslo.
Status issues?
The Oslo.
No, that's not final state issues. The final status issues was only discussed later on.
Okay, but here's the problem, right? Here's the thing that the Israelis do. They start up they enter an agreement and they say, oh yeah, we can revisit it. But what they do in the meantime is they expand the settlements, they take more land, they kill more people. They've been doing this forever. It's always in the Israelis' interest to extend it and have things going on because they have this stupid term where reality on the ground. So what they do is they purposely push things back so that the reality on the ground could be more in their favor so that when they come back and do negotiate, oh yeah, by the way, we expand little settlements, etc. They've been doing this for decades. The Oslo framework was the best framework, even though it wasn't even that great because the Palestinians had conceded quite a bit in the Oslo Accords. But the Israelis don't want peace that bad where they killed their own fucking prime minister. Do you guys understand how insane that is? They killed their own prime minister because he gave an inch to recognize the Palestinian Authority?
There's radicals in every country related to
now
this
there's radicals
issue.
in every... See, but that's my point. They are the...
Wait. Why are you being ironic? Hold on. What do you think that you just said that contradicts anything I said? You don't think I think there are radical Israelis?
No, I didn't say that there's not radical Israelis. I didn't say that. You didn't say that.
Are you saying there aren't radical Palestinians? Or
Of course there are.
Egyptians?
Of course there are.
So what do you mean? Like, oh, they're radicals everywhere.
The
person that killed, yes. They're radicals and also, yes.
Because remember what the debate was, Destiny. The debate was, who is the bigger obstacle to peace? I argue it's the Israelis, and I gave my case on that. Let's start with, and I'm going to do it.
In my case, it's just that there have been Israeli leaders, you yourself said it, that were willing to be assassinated or make sacrifices for his peace deal. Ehud Barak lost his election, off of his failed peace, basically. And there is no peace deal on the table that we can look to from Arafat.
I mean, he was messing around with Epstein. He was messing around with Epstein. I don't know, but Ehud Barak. But look, the point is, okay, let me give my. Can I give my summary and then we'll go into the conflict with October 7th because that's a whole other thing. All right, so here's my summary. Okay, let's start with the Appeal Commission. Hill Commission was basically Ben Gurion's way of getting into the international scene and say, look, even though we're colonists that are coming in here and it's not our land, etc., look, we want to go ahead and make some peace, even though we got these labor communities taking up all the land and fighting with the Palestinians and kicking them out, not letting them do what they got to do. But you know what? Let's go ahead and do some kind of peace. 20% of the land, let us get it, even though it's the best land. Obviously, the Palestinians didn't want to agree to that, right? And that led to some conflicts. Then we find out that your boy, Ben Gurion, never had an intention of actually having peace. His intention the whole time was to always take the land. This got personified once again with the 1947 partition plan, where he went ahead and said, okay, well, we're going to agree to 56% of the land, and then even though we're less than 1/3 of the population, 56% of the land, we only own about 6 to 70% legally, but yeah, let's go ahead and do this, and then we're going to overrule the Palestinians that are in our territory. No, they didn't agree to that. Obviously, a war breaks out. After that war breaks out in 1948, which, by the way, Ergun, Haganah, and Stern Gang, all these militia groups, these terrorist groups, were created in the meantime after 1937 to create the State of Israel. State of Israel was created, war ensues, etc. Then we get it fast forward into 1967. Israel starts the war because they think they're going to be invaded. They win the war, but obviously they go ahead and write the 242. We deal with that one where they don't go. They're not descriptive of the territories. They write territories. They don't acknowledge the Palestinians whatsoever, or the refugees, or the right of return. And obviously, this was written in a way deceptively to basically allow them to have more time. During the meantime, they're procuring a nuclear weapon, which again adds to my argument that they never had peace in the first place. They held on to the territories. So some of it was considered hold on to today. Then you fast forward to 1978 with the Camp David Accords. That had nothing to do with the Palestinians. The Palestinians were not talked about whatsoever in the Camp David Accords. It was just a peace deal between Sadat and Menachem, who's also a terrorist himself, leader of like the Ergun or the Haganah. And then he ended up, they negotiate this agreement. They get the Sinai Peninsula back. The Egyptians do become an ally and didn't deal with the Palestinian question whatsoever. And the reason why I keep mentioning that the Palestinians aren't mentioned is because until the Palestinians have some type of sovereignty, or there's a two-state or a one-state where they get the right to determination, is there going to be peace. So that is my basis as to why I'm making the argument that Israelis, they're the biggest obstacle to peace because they never want to answer the Palestinian question. Yes, they'll negotiate with the Egyptians here. They'll negotiate with the Jordanians here, but they don't answer the Palestinian question, which is the root cause of all these problems. Then you fast forward to the Oslo Accords. Yasser Arafat agrees to recognize Israel as a state, denounce violence, and then say that they, deserve to exist in security and peace, and Israel has a right to exist, which was a huge concession from a Palestinian perspective, because they had said, oh, we're never going to do peace with these guys. Yasser Arafat, Yitzhak Rabin, all he does is, hey, we're going to recognize the Palestinian authorities that represent the Palestinians. Though that was a minor concession, in my opinion, based on what Yasser Arafat gave. Dusty might disagree with me, that's fine. Yitzhak Rabin tragically gets assassinated a year later, and that kills the Oslo Accords. And the person that killed Yitzhak Rabin, and this is very important, was a member of the Likud party. Who runs the Likud party? Benjamin Netanyahu. Yitzhak Rabin's wife writes a book, says that she thinks that Netanyahu is the one that killed her husband. Yitzhak Rabin, Netanyahu takes power over after that, and he sabotages the Oslo Accords, as admitted multiple times in the West Bank recorded footage where he said this secretly. And then on top of that, he said it many times, oh, we're not gonna have a Palestinian state. He did everything that's part of the sabotage, to include using Jewish American neocons like Douglas Pearl and like Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith, all these other guys, to write the clean break memo, how they can go ahead and strategize on how they're gonna take over the Middle East. So once again, not negotiating good peace, not wanting peace, procuring a nuclear weapon, writing up papers to start the war on terror, which we're going to get into here next. Then you get into the Camp David Accords, which were bullshit as well, because the West Bank territories that they were talking about giving over were all fragmented. There was no contiguity whatsoever. The Palestinians had no ability to trade with the Jordanians. They had no sovereignty. They had a little shitty police force, but they were still being occupied by the Israelis. According to international law, they're still being occupied. And on top of that, the Ehud Barak, the deal that he made, literally was illegal and a war crime, because he was saying, oh yeah, we can move civilians into an occupied territory. What the fuck? Like, how's that going to work? So yes, of course, Yasser Arafat declined it. And then when that deal didn't work, and Intifada happens, but Clinton is trying to save his legacy. He tries to go ahead and write the Clinton parameters, which would, in theory, give the Palestinians a little bit more land. But the reality is it never worked out, because the sovereignty was what they wanted, the right of self-determination, which the Israelis took from them because they were occupying them in the West Bank. So that's up until the year 2000. We can go from there. That's the
Are you doing like a summary on the entirety of?
Yeah, I gave a quick summary on my thing, and then we'll go into October 7th, because I know that's going to be its own thing.
Sure. Okay, yeah. The way that this kind of works is you talk to the radical Zionists, which I've debated before. You talk to the radical pro-Palestinians, which I've debated before, and all they do is they give like a total one-sided telling of their history. And if you give a one-sided telling of the history, you can basically incentivize an infinite amount of justification to do whatever you want. When it comes to people like Israel, statements are point out that people that diaspora Jews that might have come from Eastern Europe or they might have come from Eastern Russia didn't count. They can't trace their original bloodlines back to the Middle East, which I'm pretty sure most people don't even agree with that today. That most of the people that call themselves Ashkenazi Jews, most of the people that were the Jews that were diaspora Jews around Europe, around Russia, or whatever else, like all of these bloodlines a lot of them can be traced back to the same Canaanite people that a lot of the Arabs living there for a long time have. All of the caliphates before that ultimately occupied a lot of this land in MENA, the Middle East, North Africa, displaced people there, subsumed people there, assimilated people there, forced them to change religions, kill people, or whatever the fuck. Doing the historical argument, in my opinion, is a loser, because if you go back far enough, if you want to talk indigenous people, a kingdom of Israel existed there way before any of the Islamic caliphates invaded, even before Islam was even a religion in existence. All of the Jews that initially existed in the Levant, in the Ottoman Empire territory, preceding the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1917, where it was purchased land. We can say this like they invaded and they stole it, but that doesn't pass the smell test if you even think about it for 2 seconds. Like there was a Jewish paramilitary group fighting inside the Ottoman Empire territory, displacing Arab farmers. Like, doesn't even make sense. Like, the territory was bought by Jews. Early Jews tried to make Aliyah to the Levant. They failed. They sucked. They didn't have the money and the funding for it. After the Balfour Declaration was secured by Jews in the United Kingdom, which was basically a promise to have some kind of Jewish homeland in the Ottoman Empire should the Ottoman Empire fall. The Ottoman Empire fell post-1917. The mandate for Palestine exists. Jews are still buying up land. They're moving in more farmers. They start to do a whole bunch of fucking agriculture. They start to bring water in from the Northeast or whatever. And then eventually there's conflict that arises there for understandable reasons between the Arabs that live there and between the Jews that are starting to immigrate there. This violence escalates to such points that paramilitary groups are started to be created by Jews because the British police force is no longer able to keep check with some of the Arab on-Jew violence there. Some of these people, the Lehi and the Irgun especially, engage in what the Haganah and other people would say was violence, unjustified violence or terrorism against Arab communities. You have some notable events. I think the Haran massacre in 29 was a notable one with a lot of Jewish people being killed by Arabs. I think by 36, there have been multiple white papers written, but by 36 or 37, the Kill Commission comes out, which is the first one that says, okay, like the violence and the disagreements between these two people have escalated so much that we have to separate these motherfuckers because they can't get along anymore. You can go back and you can cherry pick, whatever lines you want, saying that, oh, well, Ben Gurion said that he was happy to see the Jewish land expand or happy to see that, they could expel Arabs or whatever. Prior to 1920, a lot of Jews spoke more favorably about living together with Arabs. It really just depended on what time period you pick. As the violence increases, though, both sides obviously see each other as increasingly hostile. And the British government finally agreed with that in the late 30s. After the Kill Commission comes out, from basically from 36 to 1940, there's a whole bunch of Arab on Jew violence. The Brits basically destroy a lot of the, will become the later Palestinian, so a lot of the Arab elite, a lot of the Arab wealthy people are basically flee Jerusalem and flee the Levant because the Brits kind of fuck them over, and then the Brits clamp down on Jewish immigration, and the Brits say no more Jews, you guys are fucking around too much. The Jews get mad, they start doing terrorism from up till around 44. They're especially ass-pained because of the Hitler shit happening, and they feel like their people are now getting basically genocided, and they have no place to go to because the Brits curbed all the immigration, so they blame the Brits for it. And then Britain leaves, they say fuck this completely. In 47, you get your first big UN resolution. Okay, the wars are done. Israel is willing to agree. The Palestinians say fuck no. They start a huge war against the Israelis. It's kind of harsh at first, but eventually Israel makes a comeback. They win by 48 when they do their formal declaration of independence, because the Palestinians won't accept any Jewish people there. Then, after they make their independence declaration for all of the Arab states, go to war with the people of expelling every Jew off the land. They fail that war, although Egypt manages to take the Gaza Strip. Jordan manages to occupy and then annex the West Bank. From 67, well, you get the Suez Crisis, I think, in like 56, Israel tries to make good with France and Britain. We didn't talk about this, but they kind of sort of, push a little bit further to Sinai.
That's what made them get the nuclear bomb.
Sure. But I mean, Nasser, at the time, there's this whole pan-Arab sentiment where Arabs kind of see themselves as trying to create like a unified state again. They long for a caliphate that's not ruled by disgusting Turks. And Nasser like fancies himself as like the leader of the Arab world, and he feels like he's going to come out and be this like big dude that's going to fuck around with Israel, and he shuts down the Straits of Iran, and he says, fuck you, we're not going to let you ship shit, and suck my dick. And eventually Israel goes to war with them, with kind of the backing of the French and the British. I think it's Eisenhower. The U.S. basically tells him to fuck off eventually, and then they go home. Nasser, feels like he's king shit. He rules the world, and the whole Arab world thinks he's so cool because he, won against the Israelis, and then he goes and he fucks his whole life up in Yemen, and sacrifices fucking 80% of his troops, and then at the same time keeps talking shit to Israel. Israel basically, calls his bluff, despite the fact that you had like this unified, Syrian, Jordanian, and Egyptian front against Israel. Nasser's talking about his shit, expels everybody from the Sinai, all the UN peacekeeping troops that were there from the Suez crisis, and then does the exact same thing that caused the Suez crisis to happen, which is close the Straits of Tehran and say, fuck you, try me. And then Israel does that. They bomb the shit out of everything. Jordan tries to counter-invade Israel. They lose fucking miserably. Syria, watches everyone dies. Who the fuck knows what goes on up there. And then Israel expands their territory in a bunch of different places. Israel does make peace at this point. Myron is correct to point out that Israel doesn't have an interest in making peace with the Palestinians directly, because Israel doesn't see itself as being able to make peace with the entire Arab world. Remember, the Palestinian crisis is like a newish phenomenon. Nobody thought about like a Palestinian state or crisis at the time. Even Resolution 242 doesn't say like the Palestinian crisis or whatever. It doesn't call these things out in specific terms.
But it's the root cause for everything, is my point.
It's not the root cause for everything. That's absolutely not correct.
Okay.
No, it's a rewriting of history to make the Palestinians seem more legitimate than they actually are. Because nobody was calling for an independent Palestinian state when Jordan occupied the West Bank.
This is your summary, so I shouldn't have interrupted. I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah, that's fine. Nobody was calling for it, but nobody called it an occupation. When Jordan took the West Bank, they just annexed it, made all of them citizens. And then when Egypt took Gaza Strip, they kind of annexed that, and they did make them citizens. They left those people there because they didn't want to deal with it. After Israel wins their war in 67, they win in 73. They formally make peace with Egypt. Menachem Begin decides that it's impossible to negotiate peace with everybody. Ben-Ami calls this capsule theory that he isolate the Arab states one-on-one, especially with the U.S., who took like a huge interest in backing this, but they can make peace. So they do eventually with Egypt, which is a huge deal because Egypt was like the big player in the Middle East kind of at the time. And so, with Sadat's effort, with Jimmy Carter's effort, they made formal peace with them to give back the Sinai. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, it becomes easier to put Jordan on a peace track with Israel. They do that. And then for the most part, Israel as a region has kind of chilled out with everybody except for the Palestinian problem. That problem continues to get worse because the Palestinians, who were initially, earlier referred to as, like the Fedayeen, the fighters that would come from these different Arab states, they saw themselves as having the backing of the entire Arab world, and that basically completely vanished within a few decades to just being backed by extremist Iranian proxies who don't even give a fuck about Palestinians. They just see it as a way to fight against Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States. So now the Palestinians, in the peace agreements that Israel tried to reach with the Palestinians, they were in an awkward place because the only representation the Palestinians had were essentially terrorist freedom fighters. Arafat, emerged victorious in some conflict with Israel, I think in 64, I think 67 might have been when the PLO was formally formed, but these were freedom fighters, these were terrorists, Fedayeen, whatever you want to fucking call them, that fought against Israel. Arafat made a name for himself as being a fucking military general, not as a diplomatic leader. If you look at photos of him standing next to Muslim one, he's literally the military Arafat was never the man to make peace with Israel. The Palestinians were never able to choose a leader that would have been able to make peace. There were some Israeli leaders that tried to make, big strides towards peace or big concessions, and they often did so at great political cost or at the cost of their life or being died. Ehud Barak lost, his election. We can point to the fact that Netanyahu was elected to, and he said that he wanted to, fuck over the Oslo Accords, whatever. Netanyahu wasn't a fan of them. Netanyahu was also elected like a couple weeks after two, I think it was in Jaffa, two fucking buses. Palestinians. I think 40-some people died from this terrorist attack. So yeah, Israel was not too keen on working with Palestinians. And the Palestinians weren't too keen on working with Israelis. Like, nobody trusted each other in this region. Despite that, Ehud Barak did come back in 2000. He tried to make a deal at Camp David. Arafat accepted nothing. They walked away. Clinton, in a last-ditch effort, put out these 6 parameters. Can you guys agree to it? The Israeli administration largely agreed. There were some things that they had questions on because, like, some of the percentages just mathematically didn't work out. Arafat didn't really agree to anything. He said, "Oh, maybe, I don't know. I'd have to consider like these huge points." And he didn't agree to it. Final meeting at Tava Summit. Arafat didn't agree to anything there, and he walked away again, despite the fact that what was on the table was like an amazing deal that would have looked like basically 67 borders and some negotiation, some final negotiation on holy relics, but they never reached an agreement there because Arafat fucked off, hoping that maybe the next prime minister and the next president would give him a better deal, and it didn't. Spoiler alert, Bush fucking hated everything in the Middle East and reset that completely. And then after the second Intifada, there was basically no hope of any kind of Israeli-Palestinian, negotiation. Everything basically was fucked after that. I think the last large overture that I'm familiar with is Olmert in 2008. Had a big negotiation with Mahmoud Abbas, who would be the later leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and then I think the head of the PA. But the Mahmoud Abbas, also walked away from that deal with Omar. The story about, well, it was just a napkin, and I didn't know what would happen. That was bullshit. There was just no desire on the Palestinian side for peace, because they always feel like if they keep fighting, they can keep getting more. And that's my take on where we're at.
Okay.
Just before we move on to October 7th, I just want to ask both of you. Like, we've been going for around 2 hours and 40 minutes. Is there any specific times you want to finish by?
We can do this October 7th modern stuff.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. I was gonna take a quick piss. I just want to hear, Destiny's summary. No, look, I think, the audience can decide what they want, whether, they think you made a strong argument for the Arabs being the obstacle to peace, or the Palestinians versus, I think the Israelis are a big obstacle to peace. I guess, do you want to go first and give your take on what your positions on October 7th, or do you want me to do it?
My position's pretty simple. October 7th.
Let me piss real quick. Hold on, so I can hear what you guys say. I'm gonna take a quick whiz,
Go for it.
and then I'll get a thing, and then if anybody got to take a piss break, real quick.
Yeah. You having fun?
Popped onto Twitter just now, and I saw one of Myron's fan Twitter accounts saying, what was it called? Myron takes on Destiny and Jew or something like that. Jewhood. Is that how it goes?
That's how it goes.
Is there any specific time? I thought you were recording something else after this.
Did I say that? I hope not. I don't think so.
No, I thought you. I thought you put on your YouTube channel.
Already captured half the enemy positions.
Oh, it's just other shit.
Okay.
I play video games.
Okay. I thought it was a separate recording. No.
All right. Okay. So before we do October 7th, I want to do a quick, just to make my argument real fast. Because my argument, again, is I think the Israelis are the biggest obstacle to peace in the Middle East. I want to cover real quick the war on terror. So, obviously, as you guys know, 9/11 happened.
We're not going to grant any of this. I don't think there's any. Because we're going to clean break memo that Israel instigated everything and got us to fight, but I'm not going to agree with any of that.
That's fine, and you can totally disagree. I don't expect you to agree. I just want to give it out to the audience real quick, because again, my argument is that simply that the Israelis are the bigger obstacle to peace, and I have to deal with the neocon angle and everything else like that. So what I'll say is simply this. Before 9/11 happened, we know that there was a clean break memo, and we also know that there was the paper that came out September by PNAC as well. The authors of these documents overwhelmingly were Jewish neocons, right? Some of them even have dual citizenship with Israel. And these individuals, like for example, the clean break memo, they wrote it for Benjamin Netanyahu right after he came into office in 1996. In this document, it basically identifies several countries in the Middle East, namely, most importantly, Iraq and removing Saddam Hussein. Obviously, the PNAC document also talks about this as well. A year later, 9/11 happens, and it literally says in there, oh, we need a Pearl Harbor-like event. So after 9/11 happens, right, we go ahead and identify Osama bin Laden, blah, blah, blah. It is what it is. We don't have to go into conspiracy theories of who's involved, but what I'll do is just talk more about the aftermath. In the aftermath, what ended up happening was they were able to falsely link Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker, to anthrax when he met with an Iraqi intelligence official, I think in Malaysia or somewhere in Malaysia. And they said that there was an anthrax exchange. This was one of the chief things that the intel community and the neocons and the Bush administration in general utilized to justify a war in Iraq. And then they went ahead and said that there was weapons of mass destruction. Why am I mentioning Israel in all this? The reason why is because the cabinet and the people that wrote a lot of these policy papers were overwhelmingly Jewish neocons, from Paul Wolfowitz over to Bill Kristol to Robert Kagan to, or they were hardcore Zionists like John Bolton, etc. Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith. It was just complete. Judith Miller, who lied about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. Overwhelmingly Jewish neocons. It is what it is, and a lot of them had an affinity to Israel. Now, with the whole Mohammed Atta and anthrax angle, the reason why this is important is because Israeli intelligence gave us this information, and then Netanyahu famously came in 2002 and said that taking out Saddam will have positive reverberations all across the region. Well, we know what happened after that. We went over there. There were no weapons of mass destruction. 1 million people died. Kids starving. The Middle East completely destabilized. This led to a whole bunch of problems in the region. And this set up the war on terror. Now we can, and I would argue that in itself, because it was Israel that precipitated a lot of this, because we have dual allegiance neocons in America that are running foreign policy for us, and we have a bunch of donors involved. That led to the war on terror, which also is another reason why the Israelis are an obstacle to peace. It created a lot of problems in the Middle East. And then if you want to fast forward, Destiny, I know me and you are not going to agree on any of that, but I just want to give the audience my perspective on that with the war on terror. But if you want to fast forward to October 7th, we could do that too.
Sure. I mean, I would just say in regards to this, I mean, like, Israel had a reason to hate Saddam Hussein. Like, Saddam Hussein Iraq was the first country to actually shoot missiles into Israel, Scud missiles, during the first Gulf War, in an attempt to bring Israel into the war, because they knew that would break the Arab coalition that the United States had formed for the first Gulf War. Also, to say that they were trying to argue that taking out Saddam Hussein would lead to a more stable Middle East, that's not a hard argument to make after, the first failed invasion into Kuwait, after chemical warfare against Kurdish people in Kurdistan and North Iraq. Like, yeah, I think most people probably would have agreed with that. If Israel was always just going to fabricate some reason to bring the U.S. into war, like some anthrax bullshit, I don't know why they would write a paper on it first. I feel like you just probably wouldn't write the paper and you would just fabricate the reason later on. Well,
that was the intention the whole time, is my point, and they needed a reason to do it. So it was a plan for years, almost a decade, and then they were able to.
Why write a paper on it though? Why not just like do the plan? They don't need a paper. That just makes them look guilty as hell.
You're right. It was very stupid, and now we have the evidence. You're correct. They shouldn't have wrote a paper. They should have just done it secretly. But yes, my argument is that the Iraq War had nothing to do with the September 11th attacks. Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden hate each other. A lot of people don't know this, that they actually were going to fight each other. The whole reason why Osama hates us is because the Saudi Arabian government didn't allow him to fight Saddam Hussein during the first Desert Storm situation when he invaded Kuwait. So, it is what it is. That's my position on it. I think Israel dragged us into that war. We did not benefit whatsoever from the Iraq war. Only Israel did. And, yeah. Okay, now with October 7th, another reason why I think that the Israelis are an obstacle to peace is with the October 7th conflict. Well, how did we get there? Let's get there first with the Abraham Accords. The Israelis went ahead and recognized, they got the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and I think one other country to recognize them with the Abraham Accords. And this is something that Trump actually brokered. So I got to give, I'm very critical of Trump when need be. I know you hate Trump, but here you go. I know you'll enjoy this. The Abraham Accords were absolutely an L when it comes to peace in the Middle East, because all this did was stimulate agitation for the Palestinians, especially Hamas, because with the Abraham Accords, what that basically did was it created the process for which now the Saudi Arabians can join, and Hamas understood that if the Saudi Arabians join the Abraham Accords, it's over, because Saudi Arabia obviously has a significant amount of power and influence in the Arab world. Obviously, from a religious perspective, Medina, Mecca are very religious cities. So if Saudi Arabia had joined, that would have been a big problem. And then also, on top of the Abraham Accords, we also had the issues with recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, moving the embassy. That was obviously symbolic and problematic for the Palestinians. And then lastly, which a lot of people don't talk about, but it is very important as well, is bringing over the heifers and, trying to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque to create the temple, which there's a whole temple organization that's doing this. Ben Gvir and these other crazy people have been antagonizing them going up to the Temple Mount with their security. So this is what precipitated and what led to the October 7th attacks. And as a matter of fact, the operation on October 7th was called Al-Aqsa Flood. And the reason for that was because they were planning on destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque to go ahead and create this Temple Mount on top of the Abraham Accords and everything else without solving the Palestinian question. And this is precisely what I mean when I say, if there is not an answer to the Palestinian question, there's never going to be peace in the Middle East. And Israel keeps trying to kick the can down the road and not deal with the Palestinian problem. Now, October 7th happens. Here's something a lot of people don't know. On October 10th, the Israelis had a chance to get all the hostages back. This is reported in the Israeli Times.
Wait, before we go to the October 7th conspiracy theory. So prior to this, I would actually agree with most of this. I think that at this point, past 2005, I think Israel's appetite for any kind of peaceful arrangement, after seeing all the terrorist attacks and everything else from the Second Intifada, I think Israel's basically done at this point. Thinking that Palestinians want to live alongside Israelis in any sort of good faith manner. So I think that the Israeli side gets pretty radicalized. The Palestinian side remains pretty fucked and hateful of the Israelis. The Israelis pretty hateful of the Palestinians. However, the Palestinians have now been basically divorced from every legitimate major backer or country on the planet. The only people that are legitimately backing them are really, you've got Hamas that comes up with post 2005 as the governing body in the Gaza Strip, and then you've got Hezbollah that's starting to exist in greater force in Lebanon. 2006, I think they kind of trashed Israel and in an attempt at a little war there. under the leadership of Nasrallah. And then you've got Iran that's kind of like funneling money over to them. The Houthis kind of sort of take an interest. I think around 2017, 2018, I think Iran starts pumping a little bit more money to them. Houthis don't really give a fuck about what's going on in Gaza, though. They'll just do a little bit for Iranian money, basically. But yeah, this is at this point, nobody wants to deal with the Palestinian problem. I think Palestinians don't have a genuine solution in mind for peace, and Netanyahu is totally fine to keep kicking the can down the road and solidify basically peace with the rest of the Arab world. I largely agree with that at this point, but I mean, like, this is where we're at, where neither side is. Well, I mean, I would argue for the Palestinian side that they have never accepted any peace agreement. Israel feels like there's not going to be any peace, especially after all the terrorism in the Second Intifada, and now, yeah, this is where we're at. We're both sides just trying to infinitely fuck the other over, and then we come to October 7th, sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, as you know, there is a potential for peace, but you know, Netanyahu is doing everything in his power to not answer the Palestinian question and sidestepping it, which obviously agitates the problem, and he doesn't want to exercise any type of diplomacy at all. You know, Netanyahu, he's trying.
The Palestinians aren't even united as a people post 2003, 2004.
And he did that on purpose.
He didn't do that on his own. No, part of that was Hamas.
He funded Hamas.
No, that's Netanyahu has never personally funded Hamas. Qatar money was making its way in there
and he facilitated
October 7th, but after, yeah, of course, because either that or allow the Gaza Strip to collapse, because the PA didn't want money going over to the Gaza Strip because Hamas was the governing body there after they killed all the Fatah people and threw them off buildings and kicked them out. But yeah, Hamas is the government basically in the Gaza Strip post 2005 because the people there felt like they were fighting against Israel better than, you know, Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah or whatever was existing. I think it was Fatah versus Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And so after Hamas becomes the governing body there, and then the PA and the PLO remain like the governing people in the West Bank, well, now you've got a divided Palestinians, and now it's just infinite conflict with the Gaza Strip, which Netanyahu and a conservative Israel is happy to see, because now they've got a reason to fight against them forever, and they've got a divided Palestinian people, but it's not helping the Palestinian people at all. Like, Hamas is a huge thorn in the side there, but they're okay with being a thorn in the side there because they don't want any final agreement anyway. They want the destruction of all the Jewish people in Israel. That's why they call it global intifada. That's why they shoot rockets, randomly people all the fucking time.
Well, they have the right to resist. You know, yes, they absolutely do.
They don't have the right to launch random rockets into Israel.
They absolutely have the right to resist. I know that sounds fucked up or whatever, but the reality
is
that
it's a fundamental misunderstanding of international law. You're mixing up jus ad bellum versus jus in bello. Like, yes, you are allowed to fight against your occupier.
Yes,
but to say
and they're being occupied.
Even occupied.
It's 100% occupied.
That's a tenuous. It's probably not. Number one, but number two, that doesn't give you the right to take hostages. That's a war crime. It doesn't give you the right to attack civilian populations. That's a war crime. It doesn't give you the right to launch indiscriminate arms against an opposing force that could kill civilians. That's also a war crime. Like, none of the conduct in war is
so here's the thing.
But nobody cares about international law.
Yeah, well, yeah, but like the reality is that they are occupied by every means of the measure. They are absolutely occupied.
They're not. The main means of the measure would be a police force that displaces the local police force. That wasn't the case. The second one is like administrative power over the area. Hamas was the administrator, and then there's a third one. But by every measure,
by every measure, Destiny.
The government.
By every measure, Destiny, they're occupied. They don't control their airspace. They don't control their water. They don't control what goes in and what goes out. They have no sovereignty.
That's called a blockade.
Yeah, and that
you could argue
means
there's a blockade,
yes,
but they're not occupied.
And they're absolutely occupied. The West Bank and Gaza have been deemed by the international community as being occupied. They are 100% occupied, which allows them to have the right to resist through. It says here by any means. So
no, nothing
look,
says that in international law. No.
And it does. To include armed resistance and armed struggle.
Yes, armed resistance, but that's still, you have to follow all of the other rules of war. It's not armed resistance, just killing random civilians.
And here's the other thing too. If we're like, the reality is, who commits more war crimes? I mean, if we're gonna go ahead and have this war crime thing, like, oh well, you can't do this, you can't do that. The Israelis are committing war crimes all the time. They have. You want to talk about hostages? The Israelis have 10,000, 11,000 hostages. A lot of them without any type of charge whatsoever. That's why October 7th happened in the first place. So we have all this agitation going on, right, with Israel. Now, and then also the other thing too, and I want to talk about the JCPOA too. That was another thing that the Israelis killed. That was another obstacle, once again being an obstacle to peace with the nuclear deal. That's another example. But with whole October 7th thing, so we have all these things that happen with October 7th. That's fine. And the other thing also that's important is that there was a stand-down order, and they could have got the hostages back on October 10th. But they chose not to do that because
I don't think there was a stand-down order that's never been proven. And getting the hostages back, saying that Hamas is willing to give the hostages back if you go away, is the most joke thing in the world. You can't do a huge terrorism, capture 200 people, and then give the 200 people back and end the war. Nobody would ever agree to that order. That's an insane demand.
That's fair. That's fair. And I knew you were going to say that. But here's the difference, right? So here's the thing. The debate is, who is the bigger obstacle to peace? Israel could have gotten all their hostages back on the 10th. Now, am I saying that what would have happened was for them not invading the Gaza Strip? Now, here's the thing. Normally, I see what you're saying. Hey, well, they conducted a terrorist attack. How dare, how dare they do this and then Israel not respond? That would make them look weak. Well, here's the difference. Israel has a fantastic fucking intelligence service, okay? The Mossad, Shin Bet, Unit 8200, Amman. These guys ran a pager fucking operation for 10 years. They did Operation Rising Line where they had Mossad assets in the back line in Iran. They have the ability to conduct sophisticated operations where they can easily dismantle Hamas. And here's the other thing too. They did this against Hezbollah and they did this against the IRGC. Two militaries that are superior to Hamas. You telling me that you couldn't run special operations or do some type of intel operation where you have a bunch of collaborators in Gaza Strip and taking them out? I mean, they killed Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, Iran. So I don't want to hear anything about like, oh, well, they conduct their terrorist attack. Well, here's the thing. Who's the bigger obstacle to peace? I would argue it's the Israelis, because how many people have died because they wanted to go into the Gaza Strip? And they could get the hostages back at any time, because this is what I was going to answer your question before. You asked me, hey, why don't they release the hostages? Here's your answer. They will release the hostages. Here's the problem. Netanyahu does not want to do a final ceasefire, because Hamas will give them the hostages back, but they want a permanent ceasefire and withdrawal of all troops. Israel does not want to do that because they want to occupy the Strip. It's about getting them out of there from the first place. So again,
sure, but I mean, like, you acknowledge that them keeping hostages, that is a war crime, right?
Sure, but Israel's committing war crimes all the time. How many hostages does Israel have?
That's fine.
11,000.
Well, prisoners of war are not necessarily the same as hostages, unless you're counting every single person who's been.
They're there without charge. They're being raped at Destiny. Like they're literally they protested.
That's a whole other thing. But the reality is that like if you're raping prisoners, that is a war crime. But
and they protest for it, so they can continue to do it.
Sure. If Hamas were to release the hostages, though, the support released a while ago probably would have collapsed internationally, what little support they had, and then domestically, I think there probably would have been major upheaval as well. If all the hostages were released, I think Israel would have a much harder time justifying that war to its citizens.
They would keep fighting, dude. Like, because the reality is that
they'll only fight as long as they have the domestic support for it. But I think the domestic support for that fighting would collapse pretty fast if like all the hostages were released and now you're just on an infinite war in Gaza.
The United States would continue to support them. Even the UK would continue to support them.
Yeah, Stephen, I don't really think the domestic support will falter if the hostages come back. You've got to remember that the people who are supporting Netanyahu's supporters are on the far, not on the far right, but are the people that want Hamas to be destroyed. They want a new age.
Sure, I agree, but you guys have like a crazy coalition government with like fucking 20 different parties that are holding together Netanyahu's majority, right? I think that if all of the hostages are released, there's absolutely a decent chunk of the Israeli population that would want to see war in Gaza.
Let's go with that.
I think it would be a lot harder. Like Israel, because even today they still keep saying that 20 or 40 hostages left. They still keep citing these hostages as like a reason, and they have to give that as like their moral front. I think internationally and to their own people.
Sure.
I don't know, but maybe today, maybe they could. But I know like 6 months ago, if Hamas would have just released all the hostages, I think Israel would have. Yeah, I think they would have a really hard time going. I don't know today. I feel like the because they couldn't bring up the hostage thing ever anymore, and now they're just on a war against Hamas, and however many people die, and they can't even put the hostages on the other side of the
Well, here's the thing. Like they never cared about the hostages. That's my point. Is that once again, an obstacle to peace. They could have got the hostages back on a 10, had them all back safe, run a special operation.
I don't disagree with this, but both sides wanted the war to happen. Hamas could have just released the hostages in the beginning, and then it would have been really hard for Israel to continue. And Israel could have done more to get the hostages, but Israel's happy for the hostages to be there because they get to fucking go disassemble
and I'll
Hamas
tell you
as
why.
much as they want.
No, because if they gave the hostages up, that would have taken the only leverage they have. Here's the thing: the Israelis are superior.
They have no leverage. No, you're wrong. That's the most absurd belief. You think they have leverage? You think that Hamas has leverage over these?
I'm saying no, they don't. I said it's the only leverage they have. I'm not saying
it's not leverage. That's, if anything, it's a counter leverage. That's what's giving Israel the cause for war as much as they have. You think Israel? You just said it yourself that they don't give a fuck about the hostages.
Again,
I think that they're a very distant second place.
They don't, and they're proving that. And they're proving that right now with what's going on.
But Hamas is proving that they wanted the fighting the whole time as well. When they should have known very early on, within the first few months, we're fucked. There's no possible way we win this. But they kept those hostages the whole time, so they want the conflict to continue.
Well, no. I told you, October 10th, they were willing to give them back. The Israelis said no. That's a big deal. But
the Israelis were never gonna. I mean, you can't have somebody do a big terrorisms on you and then agree that they can be a permanent government and then you just go back to normal. There's no way that was ever gonna be.
But here's the thing: like they have the capability of destroying them from the inside out. We've seen them do it with Hezbollah. They see them do it with IRGC. We've seen them do it with the Houthis. What, dude? Did you not see the pager attack? You know they had bombs in those pagers for 10 years.
Yeah, but that's a lot different than disassemble. First of all, no, I don't know. I don't think they had bombs.
It was in for 10 years. New York Times reported. You can look it up. 10 years. 10 years.
Sure. Okay. Number two, taking the party of Hamas, which is also the government of Gaza, needs to allow military, part or segment or thing of like Hezbollah, right? Like I think that if Israel would have done a pager attack on Hamas to kill the government figures, the policing, the military, everything else, like the whole Gaza Strip would fucking collapse. And then what do they do after that?
Well, they could do what they're trying to do now, which is basically what the point is. Here's the bottom line.
What do they do? What do they do after Gaza collapses? If they were to do the same type of huge attack and destroy all of Hamas, the legitimate government of the Gaza Strip, what is Israel supposed to do after that?
They can get another government in there, or do what they always want to do, which is ethnically cleanse.
How?
They want ethnically cleanse anyway. Here's the thing. Again, my argument is simply that they are the obstacle to peace, and they could have had peace, but they don't want that peace. They want to destroy the Gaza Strip, get them out of there, and on top of that, start wars with everybody else. They literally started a war with Hezbollah. They went down. They bombed the Houthis.
Hezbollah's been at war with Israel. It's not like they just randomly started that. What do you mean? Because they're fighting forever.
Yeah, no, of course.
Shooting rockets after October 7th, right?
But they invaded. They did the Patriot attack. They invaded southern Lebanon. They said they were going to make it all the way into Beirut. They didn't do that. Then they went ahead and obviously conducted that attack, and then that set up the stage for Syria to be dethroned and destabilized. And then obviously they did Operation Rising Lion in the middle of peace negotiations. Like, this is a rogue state, dude. Like, they're doing whatever they want. And then they just bombed Qatar last week or 2 weeks ago. Like, they are absolutely the biggest obstacle to peace in the Middle East. Israel is the main antagonizer of almost every modern conflict.
Why do you think that most of the people in the Middle East, say for say like Syria and Iran and maybe Iraq, generally support Israel? Like Egypt, all the Gulf states?
Because they're cucked by the United States. That's why.
Do you think that if Saudi Arabia, the rest of the Gulf states, and Egypt could choose who do we want to lead the Middle East going Israel, who would they choose? Would they choose Iran or would they choose Israel?
Well, preferably they'd want Saudi Arabia to do it.
Saudi Arabia, Iran or Israel? Israel. Everybody would choose Israel. This is a country that's
hold
fought
on.
its way to,
No, because here's the thing you got to remember. Yes, maybe the politicians might say, you know what, yeah, politically it'd be easier for us to deal with Israel, but the reality is the people of the land would have a serious problem with that. This is why Saudi Arabia is so scared to recognize Israel, and a lot of these Arab countries are scared because they look at it like, yo, that's like we have our Palestinian brothers over there being killed or whatever. The Muslim world would have a problem with that. So what I think is, and here's the other thing too, a lot of people don't know this, Iran and Saudi Arabia are exercising diplomacy now. They started recognizing each other in 2023. So they've done.
Yeah, they might be on the path to that, but they have a highly contentious history with each other, where Iran has been like directly attacking now, or not now, but I think Trump's first presidency, they attacked. Yeah, they were attacking Saudi Arabian refineries with fucking drone attacks for the first time ever. I think in 2019.
Yeah, but yes, you're 100% right.
So they might be working their way towards like peace now.
No, they already got peace going. So since 2022 or 2023, they've been formalizing negotiations, and they recognize each other. They literally, their militaries do flight simulations together. Like, there's peace between the two now. I'm telling you, Israel is the biggest problem in the Middle East, and it is the main antagonizer for all the wars in the Middle East. Because before Israel's creation, we didn't really have a beef in the Middle East like that, dude. Oh, not only that, here's another one.
The United States wasn't even like enough of a foreign power to do anything in the Middle East. What do you mean?
I would argue we were at the pinnacle of power after World War II. And we didn't have beef with the Middle East.
Israel didn't exist until World War II.
Precisely, and they're the ones that started the problems.
No, but the United States had no. I don't think the United States cared or had anything to do with conflict, really, with the rest of the world. Even World War I, we were kind of involved with. Prior to that, we were doing our own thing.
I mean, we're involved in World War II, but like, Israel has extended the war because if you look at a lot of the modern wars we have now, it's been for the benefit of Israel, especially this war on terror. It's a whole bunch of bullshit. And here's the other thing too I want to say with Iran, right? They always say Iran's the boogeyman and all this other problems, right? The only reason Iran is fighting so hard to get a nuclear bomb now, especially, is because we pushed them to do that because of Israel's reckless foreign policy, where they're bombing Iran, they're attacking Iran all the time. We pulled out the JCPOA. Why do we pull out the JCPOA? Because Mike Pompeo.
Are you implying that there was no conflict in the Middle East, all the conflict that happened in Yemen with Egypt in the 60s had nothing to do with Israel. The Iraq-Iran war didn't have anything to do with Israel. The Afghanistan Civil War only had anything to do with Israel. Turkey and all of their revolution to create themselves as their own state in the late 1910s or whatever, 1920s, had nothing to do with Israel. Like all of the stuff that happens across like northern Africa doesn't have anything to do with Israel. Like all these places are like were violent in conflict places, especially after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire.
We have an interventionist foreign policy because of Israel, and we have destabilized, assisted, or done coups in so many different places all across the Middle East because of Israel.
Did Israel
Yes,
make us go to
100%.
South America and coup all the countries that were involved in South America as well?
I'm talking about the Middle East. Like for example,
Yeah, but
let's
hold
talk
on,
about
but if
Iran.
we wait. You can't just say they made us do it in the Middle East and that's the only reason we did it. But we also did it in Taiwan, or not Taiwan, I'm sorry. We did it in Korea, we did it in Vietnam, we did it in how many countries in South America and Cuba? Like, it seems like we kind of did that everywhere in the Cold War. Everybody was doing that everywhere in the Cold War. The Soviets versus the U.S. No?
Sure, but remember, the debate is who is the bigger obstacle to peace. I'm saying that Israel is a bigger obstacle to peace than Palestine or any of these Arab countries because Israel's foreign policy is to literally their motto is rise up and kill them first. And then don't forget with Iran.
So that's not Israel's. I don't even know what that means.
That is one of their mottos. Rise up and kill them first.
Okay, I'm not sure where that comes from. What that means, but for Iran, like. Iran is also like has been fighting with and killing troops in the Middle East as well, like post.
No. We okay. Operation Ajax. What did we do? We got rid of Mogadishu, right? They're electedly, democratically elected leader.
What does that have to do with Israel?
Israel was involved with us, the Brits.
No, that's you're dead wrong.
Okay.
We did that on behalf of the British because the Brits wanted their oil refineries and because he was going to.
Look it up. Operation Ajax.
We're
involved.
Iran, yes, but that was because
Israel
Iran was going to nationalize all of their oil refineries and Britain didn't want to lose their investment there.
Of course.
That was the.
And the Israelis were involved in helping us with that.
I don't know how they might have been involved in helping.
100%.
Israel wanted to help everybody in the West. Yeah, but we did it because of Britain. If Israel didn't exist, we would have still done that same thing.
Well, here's the thing. Yes, we did it to help Britain, but at the same time, we also what was one of the first things that Iran did when the Shah came in after him getting getting thrown out. Once the Shah came to power, he recognized Israel. I think he was the first country in the Middle East to recognize Israel.
What is that? How does that prove any point?
What I'm trying to say here is that Israel has either been directly involved in or one of the main precipitators of us creating this interventionist foreign policy all across the Middle East.
Wait, are you saying that Israel had like some interest that was a great boon to Israel that Iran
100%.
recognized them as a country?
100%. They were the first country in the Middle East to recognize them. A big one too that has a bunch of energy. That's
Iran
huge.
was like barely even considered the Middle East at that point. This was like we're like a non-player in World War II. What do you mean? What was Iran doing in the 40s and 50s? Literally nothing. People are trekking through here. Iran, like
they had a lot of oil, enough where we had to run a coup. They were a player. They
that
actually.
Was not, yeah, but that was not that had nothing to do with Israel. That wasn't helping Israel. Israel's main conflict at that point. If you do history of Israel, you don't hear anything about Iran. Iran is not involved in like fucking any of these conflicts or helping much at all until you get to like 2000.
Okay. Israel's primary arch nemesis the entire time has always been Iran. Once they got rid of Saddam, they've been fighting like hell to get rid of Iran. That's why they've been trying to get us to bomb them, pulling out the
2000s.
Okay.
You just said that Iran recognizing Israel was some great help to Israel. Israel's main enemies were Egypt and Syria.
Well, that's after we destabilized Iran with Operation Ajax, because that was a benefit to the Brits and to the Israelis. Obviously, it benefited multiple people, but again, for us to sit here and not.
Israel wasn't hurt by Iran. It didn't help them at all. Or hurt
it did help. No, it definitely helped them. It was one of the first countries in the region to recognize them. It was the first one actually in the region.
Israel. And what did that help with? It didn't help them in the Suez Crisis. It didn't help them in '67 with the Six-Day War. It didn't help them in '73 with Yom Kippur.
No, it definitely
How did it help them?
Well, for one, since the Brits control their oil, that the Israelis were able to benefit from that because that was the big reason why they even conducted Operation Ajax, because Mogadishu wanted to go ahead and actually nationalize the oil, and the Brits were like, hell no, we want to make a bunch of money. The Israelis benefited from that significantly. Right?
For how? From a cash transfer or from...
No, because what ended up happening was Iran became a vessel state for the West, and then Israel benefits from anything that we do that's a vessel of the West. Israel benefits because they're one of our main allies over there.
I don't agree with those.
You can look at Operation Ajax was conducted by who? The U.S., Brits, and the Israelis. Why? Because there was an enormous benefit to the Israelis for being involved in that.
No, you're dead wrong. It wasn't. It was for the Brits. It was to prevent all of their oil companies from being taken over and nationalized by the country. That was the Brits begged the United States to help in that intervention.
Of course, and then the Israelis assisted as well. But the Israelis benefited
I don't know what the
too.
Israeli system was.
Because they got.
In that case, so did France. So did every single country in the West benefited.
And then also, again, the argument is that the Israelis are one of the biggest obstacles to peace. Another thing, they were heavily involved in us pulling out of the JCPOA, aka the Iran nuclear deal. I think that was a good deal that was going to have Iran be in a position where we would stop them from getting a nuclear weapon. Actually, it was to Israel's benefit because Israel would be the only nuclear power in the region. But what did Israel do? Mike Pompeo's a cuck. He went ahead and pressure. He's owned by the Jews. He tells Trump, "Hey, we got to pull out of this thing." Trump pulls out by advice of him. He's the Secretary of State at the time. He puts the IRGC on a terrorist watch list in 2019, and then bam, now the diplomacy that we had worked for multiple years under the Obama administration gone. And then and why was that? Because of enormous pressure from the Israel lobby.
Yeah, I think pulling out of the JCPOA was horrible. The Iranian nuclear deal was bad. I don't think we should have done it. But if Israel has so much control that they were able to make us pull out of that deal, why didn't they have enough control to make us not intervene in the
Because Obama had a spine against the Israelis? But Benjamin Netanyahu...
if they have a spine, if a spine is all it takes, then you have no conspiracy. Then there's no way they can control it. All you need is a little bit of a spine, and now you can't do anything. Like you said before, they were assassinating people like JFK or whatever in order to keep them on board with their nuclear program and shit. And now you're saying that all you need is a spine, and now you can create one of the worst... Well, I think it was a great deal, but Saudi Arabia and Israel both fucking hated it. They felt like they got stabbed in the back by the United States, but fuck them both. I thought that was a great deal. But to say that Obama can resist Israel with just having a spine means that Israel has no power to do anything for U.S. foreign policy.
Here's the thing. Like, Netanyahu came to the United States and literally, like, challenged the sitting president of the United States and addressed our house, talking about how the JCPOA was a bad deal, blah, blah, blah. He rallied against
came from it.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. Once Trump came in, what happened? Boom.
Yeah, because Trump is a cuck, not because he got controlled by Israel. Trump is just a fucking retard.
No, well, here's the thing. That proves my point, that the Trump administration, this is my biggest criticism of Trump, he is owned by the Adelsons, he's owned by the Jews. So
well, we can say that. I don't think he's owned. I think he's just retarded. I think he sees an easy conflict and he takes it because he knows that they're always going to win. And old people like Israel. I don't think you need any conspiracy there to explain it.
I mean, again, Obama stood up to the Jewish lobby more than Trump did. So when Trump came in, one of the first things he did was disband the plan. Got Mike Pompeo in. Pompeo was a hardcore Zionist owned by the Jewish lobby. He was the main guy in his ear telling him, hey, we need to get out of this thing. And then he designated the IRGC as on the FTO list. So, and then they put the crazy sanctions on him,
Trump is just
too.
like a mega cuck for Israel, right? Nobody's forcing Trump to put fucking, who was it, fucking Huckabee as our ambassador to Israel now? Like, Trump is still cucking up Israel now. He doesn't need the money anymore. He's got a billion other scams he's running in the U.S.
Oh, yeah, but that's my point. Once again, Israel, the debate is...
How is it that every time they support them and every time they don't support him, it's like always somehow fits your theory?
No,
like,
no.
Either Obama has a spine and then Trump was forced in Trump 1, but then he does the exact same thing in Trump 2, even though he's not forced in Trump 2. Like, every single thing can be explained by the same, like, conspiracy.
No,
like, oh,
so...
they did a secret paper, they wrote the right memo in order to get the U.S. to go to war, but it didn't work or do anything, so then they had to fabricate the anthrax thing. Well, why would they even write the memo? They should just fabricate the anthrax thing. Like, every single thing can always be explained by whatever conspiracy. Like, there's no way... I can't even falsify any of it. Like,
okay, so here's the thing, okay? Number one, the argument is, who is the bigger barrier to peace? My argument is that it's the Israelis, and I'm using the angle of them pulling out the JCPOA. Now, with that said, Obama...
the argument is who's the bigger detriment to peace between Israel and the Palestinians?
Yes.
Right? The Palestinians can't be a detriment to peace with the Iranians. That's not even relevant. Right?
Yes, it is.
Israel...
Yes, it is, because the Iranians back Hamas and back the Palestinians. So, yes, it is a detriment to peace. So, what I'm saying is...
Yeah, but they only back the Palestinians because they don't like Israel. They don't give a fuck about the Palestinians. They just do it because they're trying to fight with Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United States.
Because Israel is a rogue state that has a nuclear weapon, so obviously the acts of resistance was created to insulate themselves and protect themselves.
How is Israel more of a rogue state than... Is it more of a rogue state than Yemen?
It's more of a rogue... you could make the argument. I think Israel's more of a rogue state than Iran. It's more of a rogue state than Iran.
How?
Iran was a part of the JCPOA. It was a part of the International Non-Proliferation Treaty. They actually had inspectors come in. Israel has a nuclear bomb that's illegal that they stole from us.
Having a nuclear bomb into a rogue state? Isn't that like
100%. An unacknowledged nuclear program that you stole? 100%.
Oh my God, I feel like that every other person on the planet would say that is the exact opposite. A rogue state having a nuclear bomb seems like the worst possible thing ever. I think that if they were a rogue state, they would have used it or something, right?
Dude.
Seems definitionally like a rogue state can't be controlled or...
Destiny. They bombed Qatar like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
That is one of our main allies with the biggest military base. You know how crazy that is that they bombed one of our allies?
It's people, everybody bombs. Like, Iran has bombed Saudi Arabia. Like, what do you mean? Like,
Destiny.
yeah, they bomb each other over there. What do you mean?
Destiny, we give them a lot of their aid. We give them billions upon billions of dollars. I think this year alone we've given them like $16 billion, and they bombed Qatar. Qatar has the biggest military base, U.S. military base there. That is one of our close allies. They are the intermediary to try to stop this war, and they still bomb them. That's crazy, dude.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it's not like they're not like bombing. You're making it sound like they're like fucking carpet bombing their cities or some shit, right? It's not like they're out there like, yeah, they're doing. Yeah,
hold on, let me refresh my page. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
My video's frozen. Sorry.
Sure. I think the big issue is that like Trump has absolutely no desire or control of Israel or any idea what the fuck is going on in the Middle East. So now Israel is doing, as I've said from the beginning of this debate, I feel like this is a really hard point to understand for most people. Israel will try to do as much as it can get away with, but Israel has constraints internationally and constraints domestically. When those constraints disappear, you can see some crazy shit, although arguably that might be true for literally any state, right? Who knows what North Korea would act like absent of China? Who knows what...
Do you think Myron's there? Can you hear us?
Oh, maybe not, yeah.
I'm here. Can you? I just can't see. You guys just can't see me. I'm restarting my. I think it says here that your device struggling to record. I think it's recording on your end, Ellie. Maybe that's what the problem is.
It's probably recording mine, but I'm not sure it's not recording yours.
Yeah.
It says.
Let me refresh it. Oh. Shit. Hold on. Sorry, guys. I'm joining back in. Niggas. He's got to accept me, though. I should get my video back on. All right. It's turning back on. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. I restarted my switcher. Hopefully it'll come back on here in a second.
Just before we continue, I think we're going to try finish in the next few minutes as well, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, so going back to what I was saying with the whole the JCPOA and everything else like that, I think that Israel is a bigger rogue state because they bomb they assassinate negotiators, they do clandestine operations, they do false flags, they undermine us all the time as their main person. Did you know that back in the Bush era that they had tried to get a false flag Mossad operatives, literally pretended to be CIA operatives, and they tried to arm the Jundullah to conduct a terrorist attack in Tehran at the end of the Bush administration? This is back like 2007, 2008, and the Iranians foiled the plan, but then they found out that Jundullah was actually being supported by Mossad, and they figured it out. But they were planning to be CIA guys. Like, the Israelis constantly do bullshit in the Middle East and try to get us involved in it. And Bush knew about
but
this.
Everybody does bullshit in the Middle East. And to say Bush knew about this, Bush was literally the one that put Iran on the axis of evil. The IRGC,
but he didn't want to go to war with them.
No, but we were already at war with them largely, right? Like Iran and the Quds Force have been doing tons of intervention in Iraq. Like arguably a lot of the deaths that happened there were a result literally of foreign Iranian operatives. A lot of what was going on in Syria was a result of, assistance from Iranian foreign operatives, or the money or the resources or the training that they would send to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Like, yeah, Iran does shit all across the Middle East. They're like the fucking America or Russia.
But the difference is that we don't give billions of dollars in aid to Iran. We give it to Israel. They need to be beholden to us, but they're a rogue state that does reckless stuff. I mean, the fact that they bombed
they
Qatar
are generally.
is wild.
Now, I'm not going to say prior to Trump too. I don't know how wild it necessarily is. It's kind of wild. But the issue we have right now is that we have the president is a fucking he doesn't know anything about the Middle East, so he doesn't give a fuck about anything that happens there. That's our big deal now. So now you're seeing people act crazy.
Yeah, he's too controlled by the Jews is the problem.
He's not controlled by the Jews.
He's 100%
retard.
is.
He's retarded. That's the issue.
Retarded on some things.
On all things.
On the Middle East, yes, 100% cucked and owned by them boys.
Okay. I think that
Destiny, just admit that the Israelis are the main problem. Just admit it, and I'm happy. All right,
but they're not though.
They're the
like, you're
biggest
retarded
obstacle.
if you think like, oh, who would I rather have run the Middle East? Like, there's a reason why most of the Middle Eastern leadership is totally fine with Israel, even if the Arab Street, is not the. Doesn't have the nicest thing to say about the fucking Mediterranean Jew, right? Most of the Arab leadership is like, you know what? I think I'd rather fucking
they don't want
Israel
the Israelis,
being in charge of this shit than Iran. Are you serious? Then
No.
fucking Assad. Then these are like the worst
Assad's out of there.
motherfuckers in the world.
Assad's out of there.
He is now, yeah. Or fucking Saddam Hussein. Like, these are the
The-
worst
the-
people in
these
the
guys-
world.
these
The
guys are out of
fucking
there.
Houthi family. These are the worst people in the world. The
Bro.
Muslim Brotherhood in fucking Cairo. These are the worst motherfuckers in the world.
Here's the
And
thing.
you're like, God, Israel is a fucking rogue state. They're
It is.
fucking terrible and horrible. You would living in any one of these motherfucking places. Like, every
that's
fucking
fine.
person
Look,
would rather
look.
live in Egypt, or not in Egypt, in fucking Israel. Like, fucking Arabs would rather live in fucking Israel. Arabs live in Israel do better than Arabs living in any of these fucking surrounding,
But hold on,
fuck
Destiny.
states.
That's not the argument. The argument is simply, remember, the debate is who is the bigger obstacle to peace. I'm saying the Israelis are.
I understand that's the debate is, but you're making about the entire Middle East. We're talking about the biggest obstacle to peace between Palestinians and the
because
Eastern region. But I'm saying that the broader Middle Eastern region, Palestinians aren't even going to have like any influence on this, of course.
No, it
But
does,
between the
because-
Palestinians and the Israelis will never settle for peace with the Israelis because they always feel like they can get more, so they have no incentive to do it. At this point, Israelis are radicalized so much that they figure Palestinians don't ever want peace, so they're going to keep fighting with them. And that's where we're going to go indefinitely until some international leader takes an interest in it and pushes for
The
it.
Israelis illegally occupy them. Okay, they're in apartheid. They don't have any representation. They're being occupied by a foreign government. They have no rights, nothing. So yeah, of course they're going to resist. And according to international law, they have the right to resist because what Israel is doing is illegal. Everything about Israel is illegal. The settlements, the way the country came as a formation, everything about it, according to international law, is illegal. And this is why
That's what all the Palestinians think, and that's why they'll never settle for peace because they think it's all illegal and it doesn't count.
And here's the other thing too. And the Israelis don't even want to make it right and come to some type of two-state solution or bring them in
Nobody
to a
there wants a
one-state
two-state
solution.
solution. Nobody knows what a two-state solution would look like. And a one-state solution, nobody would agree to that either.
But once
because
again,
that includes an infinite right of return.
But my point is, who is the obstacle to peace? It is the Israelis, because since they don't want to solve the Palestinian question, that creates all the other
Palestinians don't want to solve it
conflicts.
either, though.
No,
What do the Palestinians want? Really, what do the Palestinians want?
Right to self-determination and
What
sovereignty.
does that mean?
That's
Why,
it.
You can't speak in riddles. Sovereignty and right to self-determination. What does that
Having
mean?
having a citizenship, being able to not be an apartheid state where they're
right
second-class
of
citizens.
return. What do you do with the 5 to 7 million Palestinian refugees?
Okay, look.
Nobody wants to talk about that. That's one of the huge issues that the Palestinians
I didn't
won't
say
touch.
the right of return. I didn't say the right. The right
No,
of
you
return is
didn't,
not.
but that's what comes up all the time. That's one of the huge things.
No.
Even that you brought up the Arab peace resolutions or whatever before. That's a huge fucking thing.
No.
It's the-
That's not. Here's the thing. Most of the Palestinians now understand that that's probably not going to happen. A two-state solution with sovereignty and their own ability to have self-determination, which means their own government, their own military,
That's
their
fine
own
that you think
airspace,
this
their
as a
own
Westerner.
police.
No
all their whole
Palestinian has
thing.
ever given up any right of return, ever. No Palestinian leadership has ever put on paper the number of right of return refugees that have come back. That's never happened.
Well, here's
That's
the
great
thing.
for you to say that, but they've never acknowledged
But here's the thing. They won't even give them the right to self-determination. So how the hell are they going to even get a
These are
self-right
flower
return?
words. They mean nothing. What the fuck is right of self-determination?
Okay.
This doesn't mean anything.
It's simple, Destiny. Being able to govern themselves and being able to have their own government.
Hamas themselves.
No.
The Palestinian Authority governs
With
itself.
their
What do you
own
mean?
military, where they're not occupied, where they have their own airspace, they have their own water. They're not control. Their food and the power isn't controlled by the Israelis, where they can turn it off at any single time. That's why we got a fucking genocide going on with famine, because the Israelis control everything. That proves my point that they're absolutely occupied. The fact that they're starving them. So having their own sovereignty, Destiny. You're smart. You know what that means. Being able to have their own real country. That's what it comes down to.
Sure,
And since
where's the
Israelis
leader
don't
that's
give them to
negotiating for that? It doesn't exist.
They've been trying, and they don't give it to them.
Who? When?
The
No,
Oslo
they
Accords.
haven't.
The Oslo Accords was the closest to that, and they killed the fucking guy that set it up, bro. And the Oslo Accords was simply the framework. We didn't even get to that point yet, but they fucking killed it. That's how much the Israelis don't want to have peace. They're the biggest sabotagers to peace, and everybody in the international community would agree with me. This is why nobody likes Israel. This is why, and literally today, why do you think the Brits and the Australians and the Canadians recognize the Palestinian state? Because they understand that this is some bullshit that Israel's been doing for 70, 80 years. They know it's bullshit.
Talk is cheap. Yeah, that's fine. They can say what they want, but at the end of the day, nobody is like intervening to do anything. If all of this is just to make people feel good about themselves, is why Canada invented a new definition of genocide to say that they were genociding their natives so they could feel good about themselves, because it's a pat on the back. But at the end of the day, none of these people are fucking doing anything to advance any of the causes.
Every genocide expert, every scholar is coming out saying that this is a genocide, because it doesn't. You even if you
Yeah, this
eliminate the
doesn't
people
mean
in
anything.
part,
That's fine. It's a
the
genocide.
definition
You
of
can
a
say that.
genocide.
Look. Okay, let's say that. Now, how much closer are we to figuring out the solution? None. If anything, now you're further away. Why the fuck would you make a peaceful solution with a person who's genociding you?
I
all
would
you're
argue-
doing is infinitely incentivizing both sides to fight forever, and they will continue to fight. Why would you make peaceful studies apartheiding you, genociding you, ethnic cleansing you, starvationing you? Like, what the fuck?
well, here's the thing: Israel is losing. The support of the international No, that does matter.
Wait. How can
That
they lose
does
the
matter.
support? I thought you said they control everything with all the Israeli money and all the Israeli propaganda.
You're right. They do control everything, but that support is starting to wane. People on the left already, your entire party.
Wait, how
they
can
don't.
it wane if they're controlling it all with money and propaganda?
Okay,
And
can I explain? So for a very long time, talking about Jewish power or Zionism was banned on social media platforms. We all know this. However, the October 7th attacks and the current genocide going on has brought us to the forefront of conversation. Now that it's at the forefront of conversation, we got people on the left condemning what Israel is doing. This is a topic that the left typically didn't really know about or care too much about unless they were really invested in Middle Eastern foreign policy.
So what the fuck is the point of all the propaganda and the money and the Adelsons and everybody else if they can't actually control any of the media?
No. Well, here's the thing. They can't control the media anymore because we don't have to deal with Fox News and CNN anymore. Now we got independent media. People are coming out saying like, yo,
you
this is
literally
bullshit.
just said that we couldn't talk about this on independent media. I thought, don't you guys complain about the ADL controlling YouTube policy and Facebook policy and Twitter policy and everything else?
Yes.
So how do they lose that if they control it all?
Sure, I'll explain that. Because before, if you talked about any of these topics before, the ADL, SPLC would target you immediately. But now everyone, people on both the right and on the left, it used to be the right that they would target when they would talk about this shit. They would ban me, demonetize me, ban Nick Fuentes, etc. But guess what? Now Hassan's talking about it every single day. Now Kyle Kalinski's talking about it all the time. Now guys on the left are talking about it. And then other people are talking about it on TikTok. TikTok was another thing that they didn't see coming. So everybody from different political angles are seeing what Israel's doing, say this is fucking bullshit. Well, guess what? The ADL can't ban everybody. So now that it's coming out, what Israel's doing, and the world is waking up, now this has been brought to the forefront. And this is why Israel's getting absolutely decimated in the press. That's why Netanyahu's running around doing all these stupid-ass softball interviews, but won't do an interview with someone that's going to ask him real questions because he knows he's conducting a genocide. He obviously, everybody feels like there was a stand-down order. How the hell did the IDF take 6 hours to respond? We know the Hannibal Directive was activated on that day. We know that they went ahead and sabotaged a bunch of shit. That it could have included peace, included getting their hostages back on October 10th. So he doesn't want to do any real interviews. Israel's getting cooked, and they're losing support. And the United States is waning support on them right now as well. Even Trump admitted, damn, it's really tough to defend Israel nowadays.
Okay. Where are we at, Eli?
Yeah, we should probably just wrap up. Do you want to give a 1-minute recap each, or?
Sure. Desi, you want to go first? Since I went first every time.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like I've stated my position a million times. Like on the final part, like it's difficult arguing against all the Jewish conspiracies because like they're simultaneously like the most competent propagandized people ever who can control every single part of the media. But then when too many people notice, all of a sudden they have no control over any of the media. It's impossible to argue against these Mossad organizations that are at some points in U.S. history so powerful that they're literally assassinating presidents and stealing enriched uranium for nuclear programs. And then at other points, so we
that part is true.
That Alex Jones and Myron Gaines and other people and Hassan Piker are able to fight against them on the powerful alternative media platforms on YouTube. The reality is like the ADL and all these platforms were banning these motherfuckers like crazy in 2021, 2020, and then they reversed course on their policy for probably because I felt like the censorship was too much. But I just don't understand how like the Jewish conspiracy shit is like so powerful at other points and then so weak and cocked at other points. It doesn't make any sense to me. But like it's always infinitely explanatory of literally everything except for when we don't want it to be and then it's not. So I don't know. But hopefully the forces of good prevail. I guess.
Okay. Okay. So my summary, I'll try to make it quick here, but I'll summarize almost everything here. So nice and simple. My argument is simply that the Israelis have been the biggest obstacle to peace in the region, chiefly because they keep ignoring the Palestine question. We figured this out since 1937 up until now to 2025. Peel Commission, we know your boy Ben Gurion had no interest in actually doing any type of deal with the Palestinians because he wrote to his son in letters in 1937 that the goal was to always take Palestine in whole. So first it was 20%, then they moved it up in the 1947 partition plan to 56%. And then obviously that led to the war. The Israelis won that war and declared their independence. That war was done through paramilitary groups like the Irgun, Haganah, Stern Gang. The very terrorism that they condemn today is exactly how the country was formulated in the beginning. Then that leads us to fast forward to the 1967 war, where we had the 242 agreement, which was literally written ambiguously. It was written purposely in that way so that the Israelis can stall for time. It wasn't until they made a deal with the Egyptians in the Camp David Accords in 1978 where they left the Palestinians out completely, and they also left them out in the 1967 242 plan as well. And then what ended up happening after 1967, they procured a nuclear bomb during this period of time against the advice of our former president John F. Kennedy, which is another escalation. Obviously, the Yom Kippur War happened. They threatened to use a nuclear bomb in there, once again, subverting the peace process, putting Nixon in a very difficult spot where we had to give them the biggest airlift so they can win the Yom Kippur War because they would have lost. Then you fast forward to 1993 with the Oslo Accords. Yasser Arafat conceded and gave them the ability to be recognized as a state, their sovereignty, and denouncing violence, and the fact that Israel has the right to exist. Yitzhak Rabin, all he gave him in exchange was the PA, which was nothing more than a security force that worked on behalf of the Israeli government and the Shin Bet. What ended up happening after that, a year later, Yitzhak Rabin gets assassinated by a far-right member of the Likud party. Benjamin Netanyahu takes power after that. The Clean Break memo is written where they write up in our strategy of how they're going to take over the Middle East, 7 different countries. Fast forward over to the Camp David Accords in 2000. That was a bullshit deal. The West Bank was fractured for the Palestinians. The Israelis maintain all the main resources, all the fertile ground, all the waterways. They control 60% of the West Bank. They continue to expand it. In the time that Yitzhak Rabin was done, it was kicking the can, which would give them more time to expand, because the Israelis practice this very devious tactic of facts on the ground, which basically is, hey, let's go ahead and have a peace deal now. And then a year passes by, 2 years pass by, they expand the settlement. Oh yeah, well, we can't negotiate like that anymore, blah, blah, blah. And they've done this purposely. They always kick the can down the road. And we know this based off what's going on in 2023. Then you fast forward in 2001, the war on terror. We know that was a lie, because PNAC and the Clean Break Memo and the Jewish neocons that ran our American foreign policy in the early 2000s basically got us into war with Saddam Hussein and Iraq, which didn't benefit us at all. Once again, subverting the peace process. Then we fast forward into October 2023. Many people think that Benjamin Netanyahu allowed the conflict to happen because he benefited from it. He was able to invade every country he wanted to invade. He was able to operate his Mossad operations that he wanted to do with Operation Rising Lions, Operation Pager Attack. And he was able to keep himself out of prison. I forgot to mention that as well. He had quite a bit to gain from waging a war on 7 different fronts and keeping himself out of prison, which he definitely would have been convicted of on the corruption trial. So, and then they also got the United States to pull out of the JCPOA, once again, subverting peace by giving an enormous amount of pressure on Mike Pompeo, on Donald Trump, to pull him out, while simultaneously maintaining an illegal nuclear program that they procured against the wishes of our former president, John F. Kennedy. So that, for all those different reasons, which obviously I'm summarizing from a bird's eye view here, for all these reasons, this is why Israel has been the biggest obstacle to peace in the region, by not giving the Palestinians a state and creating wars all across the Middle East up until this day, and refusing peace up until the point where they literally bombed one of our best allies in the region with our biggest military base, once again subverting American influence in the region, embarrassing us, putting us in a bad political space, because the Israelis don't give a fuck about peace. They just want war, and they want to have the hegemony in the region.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, bro. It was a good discussion. Destiny, it's always good to talk to you, bro.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation.
All right. I'll stay on stream, guys. But shout out to you guys. Or you guys want to shout out your stuff, where people can find you?
You can search up Eli Hassel on YouTube. Yeah, I'm sure everyone knows Destiny.
Yeah, youtube.com/Destiny, kick.com/Destiny.
Cool.
Also your payment thing that people can subscribe to.
Yeah, where's your Destiny.g. Okay, cool. All right.
All right. Have fun. Thanks a lot.
All
I'll
right,
see you guys later.
Later, guys.
Yeah.
Peace.
Peace out.
Thank you so much. See you.
Good time. All right. Cool. Let me close this out, guys. Give me 1 second, ninjas. I'll turn my camera on. What'd you guys think? Do you guys enjoy that? Good debate? All right. All right, what'd you guys think? Was that a good discussion or what? Was that a good discussion? You guys enjoy that one? Let me make sure my mic is good and shit. All right, hold on. Is the audio good and stuff, guys? I got this shit on a whole other thing. I don't know if y'all heard those sound effects or whatever. Let me make sure. Let me see if you guys can hear. Yeah, it looks like you guys can hear that shit. Okay, I got to turn my goddamn headphone. All right. Awesome. So that's the speeches by then? Yeah. Hey, man, I told you guys, bro, like, this is why Zionists don't want to debate me, because here's the thing. Destiny's very smart, bro. He knew a lot more than other people did. You know, he had a good grasp of the partition plan. The only thing that he was wrong about was the whole 6% thing, like saying that the Israelis own land. That's a verifiable lie. And I can go ahead and find that for you if you guys want. Here, let me go ahead and find it for y'all, because they kept asking me like what was my source or whatever. So I'll go ahead and pull it for you guys here in a second. Give me 1 sec. But yeah, that was like the one thing that they kept trying to harp on, and I was like, dude, like the Israelis didn't own any of that fucking land. Like what? Oh yeah, he was checking Wikipedia too, right? Yeah, dude, I literally didn't search anything, dude. That was all guys like me just off the top and like taking some notes. Like I'm telling you, bro, like this is what I do, man. I might have to be the new Palestine defender, bro. So I'm going to read some chats as well. Sorry, guys. I didn't mean to forget about the chats. Obviously, when you're in the mode and debating, you're like, oh, shit, you know? So, but yeah, dude, like, look, man. Like, here's the other thing too. I gotta let you guys know. Like, anyone that's Arab, right? You guys know my family's from Sudan and shit like that. Bro, we are all J-pilled. Like everybody, from that part of the world is J-pilled, bro. You know what I mean? Like it is what it is, right? It's just the reality. Hold on, Chris is calling me, or maybe he's not calling me. I don't know why this nigga's calling me. All right, but yeah, we can go ahead and go through some of the fact checking and shit. But it was a good discussion. It was a good discussion. All right, let me look here. All right. Okay, but I'm gonna read some chats here. Okay. BP Rocket subscribe. Shout out to you, bro. Hold on. So welcome to the OSS. Mike Ox says, the further you go down the rabbit hole, the rabbit slowly goes silent. Facts. God says, W for winning, but Destiny definitely just argues for the sake of arguing. He got cooked. Okay. You guys think I won? Destiny got cooked. Well done. Emotional motherfucker. W Chef Myron, L moderator. All good. Israel killed 4 Americans today. I'm tired of the fucking parasites, bro. I'm telling you, man, these niggas are the worst. WED, good work, Myron. You're going to cook these college kids when you go to college campuses, bro. I'm telling you, man. I am the Zionist destroyer, bro. And here's the thing, like, I'm not even like really, like, I just know the truth. Rambo says, I just got here. What did you do? Destiny looks defeated. Hey, man, I don't think he was prepared for that. I ain't gonna lie. Ken Rose with $5. Appreciate that, bro. Thank you so much. Let me close some of these tabs here real quick. Let me make sure I didn't miss any of you guys' chats. Okay. Shout out to the OSS guys. I read all OSS chats, so make sure you get in the OSS, man. I read all of them. So I'm going through right now and reading them for you guys. Okay. Here, Myron, there's a shooting in my town. Crazy. I was just there and heard Pops kind of freaking out. That's from Lopez Mayo. Okay, Lopez Mayo, send me your town name. WSS, the funny thing, this is a funny video of Bassem Youssef roasting Jonathan Connerkiss on the boys on Piers Morgan show. Think it'll be fun. I'll be willing to get roasted by the chat. Okay, Drewski, audio is good. Slight echo on your voice. TPC Films, I think this sums up your whole argument with Destiny, who probably is going to call you or say you're an anti-Semite. No, he didn't do that. Destiny did a good job. Council Club says, not trying to derail the show. Got you in my ear. Appreciate you, bro. Oscar says, I don't know if y'all noticed, but every time Myron starts cooking, Destiny interrupts. Yeah. Padawan Slayer, you can end Destiny by reading Jewish Encyclopedia 1925. Well, yeah. SS Dom, Jays are the only set of people on planet that operate as religion and the ethnicity to give them massive advantages and loopholes. Absolutely. TNS Graper, this uses AI, therefore his position is always going to side with the Jays. Yeah, that's true. TNS Graper says the framing should be, can Israel give the Palestinians a fair peace offer that's in good faith? Well, I went over that. Jill says Destiny is one of those people that doesn't know what's going on. Then when you explain it to him, he acts like he knows it all. Yeah. TJ says, tell them about how months before Rabin's death, Netanyahu was doing mock funerals of Rabin like it was fucking funny. Oh, I didn't know that. Mike Oxlong says, the further you go down the rabbit hole, yep, okay, caught up on there. Okay, Myron, will you verify this? Breaking news, Florida rolls out new license. Yeah, that is true, bro. Pin, that is true. That is true. Ken Rose, thank you. Rabo says, I just got here. What did you do to Destiny? Looks okay, we're caught up on chats. Awesome. All right, let me make sure. Guys, are we good? Am I lagging on any of these platforms, or are we good?
We are Cloak and Dagger. We are hope and fear.
Are we good, guys?
Round one, go! I wouldn't know the real power of the light.
30 seconds before you attack. Get ready.
We're not lagging? Okay. Cool.
I don't think I could handle the
I think I
pressure
might
of
switch
darkness.
off YouTube and just go Rumble and Kick. Give me 1 sec, guys.
How's biz, Ash?
Great, especially with the help of Zero accounting software, I can keep my cash flow flowing by giving customers more ways to pay.
So
Warning, sweat. Taste test, sweat. Go time, grow time, big time, sweat. Sweat moves you forward. We'll make sure it never holds you back. Degree, here for sweat.
In 1921, in Logan County, West Virginia, the largest labor uprising in American history would take place. 10,000 coal miners would go to war against the local sheriff's department, coal companies, and eventually the United States military. Complete with spies, assassinations, and even aerial bombings, the Battle of Blair Mountain is the largest armed rebellion in the nation's history, besides the Civil War. And I guess also the War for Independence, but it's the largest that doesn't have war in the title. But the Battle of Blair Mountain wasn't just about the battle. It was about years of poor working conditions and abuses brought on by coal companies. So today, I want to talk about how something that began as a union protest resulted in open gunfights, and talk a lot about some of the weird local politics and history that allowed this to happen in the first place. Before we begin, I want to say the Brainwashed collection is only available for like another week and then it's gone forever. So if you want to get in on some of this merch, like the Panopticon shirt and shorts and the Keep Watching fanny pack, then head to the link in the description at wendigoon.shop, and if you decide to support in that way, it means the world, and thank you. And remember, only like a week left, so get it while you can. And if today's topic sounds interesting to you, then stick around after the ad as we talk about a moment in American history that's hard to even imagine. I mean, I guess there's a lot of like fictional stuff about revolutions and uprisings and things like that, but hard to imagine in real life, even though I guess fictional stories are just imagining real life. You get what I'm saying. As someone who's chronically online, I know that eating healthy isn't always easy, or fun. Between traveling, family, and work, it can be tempting to take the option that's cheap and quick. Thankfully, today's sponsor, Factor, has you covered. Factor gives you the flexibility to stay active without succumbing to a cheat meal when you're short on time. Their meals are chef-crafted and dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. And now there's even more Factor to love. They've doubled the size of their menu, so now there's over 80 options to choose from every week. They've doubled their seafood options, they've doubled the high protein options. There's even a meal customization option now that lets you swap one protein for another. They even have new Asian and Mediterranean food options. And on top of being delicious, Factor also helps you stay healthy. Balanced meals with no refined seed oils or no refined sugars. Factor helps you eat smart and takes out the guesswork. Between reading and meetings and recording for this job of mine, Factor has been a massive help to me, and I'm sure it will be to you as well. And if you want to get in on Factor, then now's the perfect time. Because if you scan the QR code or head to the link in the description at factor75.com and use code WendigoonFB50, you'll get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. That is right, half off and free breakfast for a year. Again, that's code WendigoonFB50 at factor75.com or scan the QR code to get in on this incredible offer today. Thank you all for watching the ad, and thank you to Factor for sponsoring the channel. Their link will be in the description. We are now back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. To make sense of how the battle began in the first place, we need to talk about some of the working conditions that had people so upset in the first place. I should also mention here that if you're interested in this story, my primary source is The Battle of Blair Mountain by Robert Shogan. The book goes into great detail about a lot of the political events of the time and legislation that led to these conditions in the first place. So if the story sounds interesting to you, I highly encourage you to check the book out. I'll have it linked in the description. For most of civilization's history, coal has been a necessity, and as societies became more industrial, coal grew in demand. That's because coal is used in everything from generating electricity to creating steel, things that are pretty important in a developing nation. Pulling coal out of the ground tends to be the first step in a near infinite chain of energy and commodities. However, it's that pulling coal out of the ground that has historically been not so easy. While modern technology and methods makes it a far safer option compared to what it was, for hundreds of years, coal mining was an incredibly dangerous and laborious process. Most of the time consisting on pulling the ore from the earth by hand, working in cramped, musty, pitch-black conditions for hours on end. Mining accidents were incredibly common. Everything from falling in the dark cave to being injured in an explosion, which, injuries and explosions can mean the explosion hit you, the debris hit you, or sometimes the whole mountain fell on top of you. Heck, my great-grandfather was killed in a coal mine when he got crushed to death while he was working his way through a crack in the earth that he had to crawl on his hands and knees in. He didn't know that there was something above him called a kettle bottom. Kettle bottoms are fossilized pieces of tree within coal mines, most often tree stumps, and they're dangerous because while they look like part of the cave, they're actually not connected to the other rocks around them and are instead just sitting there, while still weighing several hundred pounds. So while working on a coal seam above him, he accidentally freed a kettle bottom and it killed him in an instant. And if you were fortunate enough to not die inside of the mine would probably kill you after you left. Because, you know, spending years underground in minimal ventilation with all kind of particulates floating around in the air isn't good for you. Lung issues like COPD, lung cancer, or black lung are very common. Which, by the way, black lung, also known as coal workers' pneumoconiosis, or CWP, is a disease caused by inhaling coal dust over long periods of time. Black lung leads to inflammation and scarring of the lungs. Despite there being signs of it all the way back in 1830, it was not formally recognized by the government until 1969. And it was black lung brought about from working in the coal mine that killed my grandfather, the son of my great-grandfather that was killed in a mine by a kettle bottom. Suffice to say, coal mining was a dangerous job, but one that needed to be done. So you may hear all of that and think, oh, well, at least they were probably paid fairly and treated well, right? Which, you know, yeah, that'd be nice. No, for a period of time around the mid to late 1800s, most coal miners in Appalachia, where coal was most abundant, lived in things called company towns. A company town is a town ran by a company. Hard to believe, I know. Company towns were structured in such a way that every aspect of a coal worker's life would be through the company.
Who is the best racer between us?
They would come to work at the mine and then receive housing in a town located just outside the mine. They would do their shopping at stores provided by the mine. Their kids would go to school at schools funded by the mine. Their entertainment would be whatever the mining company put on, and even the church they went to was whatever the company set up. It was so bad that in most cases, the company wouldn't even pay the workers with money, it would instead pay them with scrip, a currency that could only be used within the company itself. So the company would have workers gather coal that they would then sell and make a profit on, and to the workers, they would just print monopoly money and hand it out as their wages. Then not only does leaving the coal mine, meaning you're leaving your place of work, your place of residence, the place your kids go to school, and the church you go to, but now you don't even have any money to leave with, because all the money you've made is useless outside of the company walls. As the existence of company towns and working conditions within the mines became publicized, groups of people decided to do something about it, and one of those groups was the United Mine Workers of America. The United Mine Workers, or the UMW, was the first big successful coal union within the United States. Unions began to gain prevalence in the United States around the mid-1800s, and while the first coal miner unions began around 1861, they were fragmented and didn't have a lot of power on their own. So in 1890, the major unions combined into the UMW. UMW's goal was simple: to get better working conditions and wages for mine workers. One of the major tenets that UMW continued to push was that workers should be paid with American dollars instead of the aforementioned scrip or monopoly money. The main way UMW would do this was by staging strikes. The UMW was a large organization with a lot of funds, so they would petition for coal miners to join the union, and once enough of them had joined, they would stage strikes at specific mines, forbidding their union members from working. This created a condition where the mine owners now have to negotiate or risk losing business. This was particularly effective in the late 18 and early 1900s when the United States was going through a huge industrial boom, and if any coal company got too far behind on production, they were left in the dust. So around the country, the UMW began to see better wages and better conditions for workers. Or at least they did in most of the country. Pretty much everywhere except West Virginia. See, West Virginia, specifically the southwestern portion of West Virginia, as well as the bordering portion of eastern Kentucky, was home to the most abundant coal crops in the country. Because of that, coal mines were everywhere, as were coal companies and, crucially, coal miners. See, in that part of the country, coal mining was generational. It's what you did, it's what your dad did, and it's what his dad did. Because of that, tragically, poor conditions were just considered a part of life. And because for decades it was the only industry in the region, workers didn't have the option to go elsewhere. So this made union efforts around the region ineffective. Because it didn't matter how many people the union got on board, the company would just turn around and hire non-union members. As a matter of fact, several coal companies were so confident that the union would have no effect that they began to institute something known as a yellow dog clause into workers' contracts. This was a clause that forbid workers from joining the union. Or in other words, when you signed up to work, you wrote on paper that you would never join a union. So for a lot of workers, because remember, the company town thing is still in effect at a lot of these coal mines, not only did losing your job mean you were also losing your housing and community, but if you even join a union to try to get better conditions, you lose all of those things too. Not only did these strategies make it near impossible for the union to get anything done in the region, but the efforts of the coal companies also hurt the union elsewhere in the country. Because now, anytime they try to stage a strike in another state, the manufacturers can just always buy coal from the non-union mines in West Virginia, making strikes across the country all the less effective. And anytime the union could get enough miners together in West Virginia to stage a protest, it was met with extreme force. The reason for this was the private security system that coal companies would employ called mine guards. Mine guards were, on paper, a security company hired by coal companies to protect their interests. What it most often became was a private police force, doing things like evicting people from their homes or destroying union vehicles or equipment. This was legal because it was under the guise of protecting the company. Just, sometimes protecting the company meant beating up people who might join the union. One of the main groups that contributed to the mine guard operation, at least in West Virginia, was the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. Baldwin Felts began as a detective agency. They were often hired by railroad companies to investigate train robberies. But as train robberies became less popular and workers' strikes became more popular, they switched to stopping those. Baldwin Felts would do everything from standing guard at coal mines with guns to participating in strike breaking, the act of breaking up a workers' strike, and they would most often do this with guns and explosives. It was this combination of factors that would lead to the first big event that would eventually lead to the Battle of Blair Mountain, and that was the Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike.
There's a reason Chevy is called the heartbeat of America. It's in the pulse of those who never stop getting the job done or the party started. This summer, Chevy drives America. Chevrolet, together let's drive.
What sets us apart? At the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office, we are guided by the mission to serve and protect through dedication, professionalism.
In 1912, in Kanawha County, West Virginia, a miners' strike began. This was one of the UMW's first big pushes in West Virginia. They had managed to get enough supporters and enough local leaders to hold a real strike. One of these local leaders was a woman known as Mother Jones. Mother Jones herself is an incredibly influential person in the history of working conditions and unions in the United States. Born in Ireland, at a young age, her family immigrated to the United States. However, tragically, her husband and 4 children all died of yellow fever in 1867, and then 4 years later, her business was destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire. From there, she dedicated the rest of her life to helping workers' conditions. This entailed everything from her leading rallies and marches and speeches, to approaching armed guards in the midst of a protest and demanding to be let through. She was instrumental in some of the first child labor laws and was a co-founder of the Industrial Workers of the World, a massive trade union. So during the Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike, she was on the ground leading a lot of these rallies and protests. Eventually, the union was able to get a lot of local mine workers to congregate at a piece of land between Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, West Virginia. So in response, the local coal companies began to hire the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency to do whatever it takes to break the strike. This began with sabotaging people's vehicles, burning a few homes. Then it escalated to placing snipers around the strike, shooting at people along the fringe of the group. And when the mine workers began to take up their own guns and threaten to fight back, the strike resulted in gunfights. Keep in mind, these mine workers weren't asking for anything egregious. Among their demands included stop blacklisting discharged workers who worked for the union, that the mine operators accept and recognize the union, that they be paid with actual money instead of company scrip, and a check weighman system. At the time, coal miners were paid based on how much coal they produced. So at the end of the shift, whatever coal they had amassed in a cart would be weighed and they would be paid accordingly. However, it was often just one person who worked for the company that determined how much coal you brought in. So if you brought in 2,000 pounds of coal in a day, but the company doesn't want to pay that much, well, then maybe this guy says you just brought in 1,500, 1,600 pounds. So this demand to have a two-person weighman system is to say a check and balance to make sure the miners are actually paid for how much coal they produced. This was enough for the coal companies to decide to kill them over it. Because after the coal companies managed to lobby with the West Virginian government to declare martial law, the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency mounted up a train that the miners referred to as the Bull Moose Special and drove the train along the outskirts of the strike, firing machine guns into the strikers' camp. In addition to this, since the region was under martial law, several of the mine workers that had taken weapons to defend themselves were taken up into military courts and thrown in prison. One of these was Mother Jones, who was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, after passions cooled and a middle ground was reached between the union and the local coal companies, she would end up only being in prison for 85 days, although during that time she got pneumonia and nearly died. The strike itself began in April of 1912 and ended in July. It's hard to tell between all the violence and malnutrition how many people died in those 3 months, since a lot of people at the time just weren't documented and several families would just bury their own. But most estimates guess it from as low as 12 to well over 50. And while some of those were Baldwin Felts agents who were shot by the strikers, most of that was miners and their families. This quickly established that any improvement in West Virginia coal mine working conditions was going to come at a heavy cost. Over the next decade, small instances of things like this were not uncommon. Several mines would still employ Baldwin Felts as a private security. As mentioned, if you lost your job at the company town, that also meant you lost your housing. And even if around this time several company towns began to pay people with real United States money, everything about being kicked out still applied. So Baldwin Felts was often hired to perform these evictions. As you could imagine, this led to a lot of skirmishes throughout Appalachia. However, after the Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike, a lot of this was more subdued in the public consciousness. It would be a one-off story of an event that happened at one mine and wasn't connected to the whole. And problems people had with the mine were certainly put on the back burner during World War I. See, during World War I, the American industry converted over to the war machine. And coal was considered such a needed commodity that coal miners were exempt from the draft. Despite this, over 50,000 miners joined up to fight, and about 3,000 of them were killed. During the war, there seemed to be this sort of unity. Even if working conditions were bad, everyone felt like they were working for the commonality of their country. Even union organizers stepped back to a degree, being more hesitant to start a strike in such a crucial corner of industry while the country was at war. However,
can you
when
get off
World
Ultron?
War I ended in 1918, things got a lot worse.
What about
Because
support
during
switched
the
to
war, a
Squirrel Girl
lot
for
of
some
new
reason,
mines
so
had
now
opened
you're...
up to keep up with the rise in demand. And once the war ended, all of those miners who had joined to fight were now back in the United States looking for their old job. So that meant there was a plethora of workers and a plethora of mines. So the union had even less pull in an area they already didn't have pull. You could strike at any mine you wanted to, and it didn't matter because that company probably owns another dozen mines around the state, and the buyers could always pick the mines with the cheapest coal, which normally meant the worst working conditions. So in 1920, the president of the United Mine Workers of America, John L. Lewis, decided that enough was enough and they were going to do something about the coal mines in West Virginia. Now, to mitigate the risk of me coming across as so black and white of several of the individuals involved, the coal companies had done a great job at demonizing the union. Anytime the union would hold a strike, it would be framed by the coal company as a group trying to take away from American industry and American prosperity. And any union complaint that was brought about during wartime had the union framed as an enemy to the country. Not only that, but several union leaders were framed as crooks, trying to secure backdoor deals for their strikes, which are actually pocketed funds. Now, I'm also not saying that the union was perfect. I'm sure there might have been some malfeasance going on. I mean, look at more recent union leaders like Jimmy Hoffa of the Teamsters, who we know was in league with the mafia. There certainly might have been some bad actors, but by and large, the goal of the unions was to make coal workers not die as much and also make money that is real money. One side believing unions to be standing for human rights and fighting for the little guy, and the other believing them to be crooks at odds with the nation's progress. Because of this and how relevant it was to the region, several counties in southern West Virginia began to draw battle lines, with some counties' leadership falling in favor of the Union and others being staunchly anti-Union. A domino effect would begin that would lead to the largest gunfight in non-war American history when John Lewis and the UMW decided to focus their efforts on Mingo County, West Virginia. In early 1920, the UMW began to rally support around Mingo County. Mingo County, just over the Tug River on the Kentucky border, was home to multiple mines, several of which hired Union and non-Union members. Since there was already a foothold, the Union decided to grow their movement there. For one, the Union's district in Mingo, District 17, was headed by President Frank Keeney and Treasurer Fred Mooney. Frank was known for delivering fiery speeches, and both him and Fred were well liked in the community. On top of that,
in the neighborhood aspect of building business, you think big. We're making the swag shop a global brand, and I'm determined never to lose the values of this neighborhood.
We give up so many freedoms as a service member when we deploy that 99% of the country just doesn't know.
Every time I choose to help a military person, I get the opportunity to stand for something greater than myself.
The military lifestyle is still so relentlessly challenging. We need as many people as we can, all hands on deck, to make sure that we're taking care of these folks, because they're taking care of us.
local officials in Mingo were supportive of the Union. The mayor, Cable Testerman, was a proponent of the Union, as was the sheriff, Sid Hatfield. So the Union enlisted the help of Mother Jones, a woman who had become much more famous following her imprisonment at the previous strike in 1912. So when Mother Jones, a woman who had the nickname of the most dangerous woman in America, began to show up in Mingo County and give speeches, union and non-union workers alike came out to listen. These efforts proved a success, and in the beginning
that
of
torch was
1920,
dog
over
shit, brother.
3,000
God
non-union
damn!
workers joined the
You
union.
ain't do shit
Now,
with that,
it's important
damn!
to mention that while there were instances of open hostility, as in people shooting at each other, at this moment, union and non-union members were not in open conflict. Meaning, even though the mayor and sheriff of Mingo were in support of the union, they did not try to stop non-union mines from firing union members or hiring Baldwin Felts. But needless to say, as you can imagine, tensions were high. And it was those tense conditions that led to what would occur on May the 19th, 1920 in Mingo County, West Virginia, in the small town of Matewan. See, one of the coal companies was about to perform a series of evictions on employees they had recently fired. Given that tensions in the region were so high, Baldwin Felts sent 12 of their best men, 2 of which were brothers of Thomas Felts, one of the Baldwin Felts founders. One of these brothers, Albert Felts, led the dozen agents into Matewan. Things got off on a bad foot immediately. The first thing Albert Felts does is approach Mayor Testerman and ask if Baldwin Felts can put machine guns on the roofs of the town, saying it would be useful to the agency if things go south. So this is a guy working as a strikebreaker who is asking a union-sympathetic mayor if they can militarize the town. Mayor Testerman says no, and Albert replies by trying to bribe him. With that, Felts lets it be and goes about his day. That night, the dozen agents began their evictions at the nearby company town. As you could imagine, evictions were a bit of a soft spot. Sure, if your place of work is providing you housing and you lose your job, it makes sense they would want you to leave. But everyone had a problem with agents showing up and acting as bullies, just throwing people's belongings into the street. And while sure, the agents were acting on behalf of the coal company, it was morally dubious to do it with such force. So while the agents are clearing out houses that night, the police chief, Sid Hatfield, decides to do something about it. Sid Hatfield had a reputation of being a bit of a troublemaker. Before he was made police chief, it wasn't uncommon for him to get into fights and wind up on the other side of the law. Because of this, Hatfield himself was a bit of a local legend. He would cut up and party with the rest of them, but make no mistake, he didn't like bullies. So he shows up where the agents are doing the eviction that night and tells them to stop. Albert Felts and the other agents say they're here on behalf of the company, and Hatfield needs to get lost. Hatfield, sensing this may turn into a fight, leaves, and instead waits until the next day when the agents are about to leave town. When the 12 agents arrive at the train station after their job is done, Hatfield shows up with several deputized miners. And with this makeshift posse, he walks up to Albert Felts and says he has a warrant for his arrest. the warrant being for unlawful evictions. Albert laughs and says he has a warrant for Hatfield's arrest. To dispute the matter, Sid Hatfield and Albert Feltz begin to walk towards the mayor's office. Well, not really an office. Testerman owned a jewelry store in town, so they were going to his jewelry store. As they're walking through town, both of their respective groups are following in tow. Mayor Testerman sees the group walking towards his jewelry store and meets them out in the street, standing right in front of a nearby hardware store. Now, the following series of events have been debated and he said, she said it into oblivion. What most reports agree happened is that Testerman walked up to the two men who were at the front of the pack and asked to see Albert's warrant for Sid Hatfield's arrest. Meanwhile, Hatfield slowly slips inside of the hardware store, still a short distance from Albert Feltz and the mayor out front. The mayor, while looking at Albert Felt's warrant for Sid Hatfield, says that it's a farce. And then we don't know exactly what happened next, but what we do know is that people started shooting each other. Others say as soon as the mayor said it, Feltz shot the mayor. Others say that Hatfield saw Mayor pull the gun and both fired their guns at the same time, one into Feltz, one into the mayor. What is for sure is as soon as someone fired that first shot, everyone else started shooting. That street in Matewan turned into a shooting gallery. Baldwin Feltz agents ducking for cover, deputized miners firing from store windows. When the gun smoke cleared, 10 men lay dead. And among those 7 dead agents was Albert Feltz and the other Feltz brother, Lee Feltz. 6 Baldwin Feltz agents managed to get away, with several of them jumping across the Tug River and swimming to safety in Kentucky. Which I guess I should clarify, it wasn't 12 Baldwin Feltz agents that went. It was technically 13, because it was Albert Feltz and then 12 men. If Southern West Virginia was powder keg ready to blow, then this was the match. What started as a coal company hiring out a business to carry out evictions had resulted in a shootout that killed 7 people from that company, 2 of which are brothers of one of the founders, 2 deputized miners, and the mayor. This instantly became a political firestorm. The union used this event as fuel for the engine. What better example for how out of control the coal companies are that they hired a gang that shot the mayor. This led to a new wave of resistance all across Mingo County, as several coal miners said, oh, we can just shoot those guys. So in the months that would follow, small skirmishes would happen from time to time between Baldwin Feltz agents that overstepped their ground with Union men. This defeat was also perceived as a sort of embarrassment for Baldwin Feltz, and assumedly, seeing that the emperor has no clothes, a lot of miners continued to sign up with the Union. With a growing spirit of rebellion rising up in the area, Union and Union sympathizers began to stockpile weapons and ammo.
I'm entering the tournament. Come with me.
What are you driving for? A home? A family?
We make a good team.
That we do.
I appreciate you.
Mayor Testerman's jewelry shop was taken over by Sid Hatfield, who converted it into a gun store. While this event seemed to be a win for the Union initially, it also had the effect of making the companies double down. For example, Police Chief Sid Hatfield was immediately put on trial for the murder of Albert Feltz, the trial beginning several months later in January of 1921. But as mentioned earlier, there were so many different accounts of what exactly went down, and Albert Feltz was far from an innocent party, so eventually Sid Hatfield was acquitted. With this acquittal, Hatfield was solidified as a hero in the local community. There was a large celebration, and he was carried through the streets of the town when he was released. The miners' union saw this and decided to capitalize on it, creating a silent film called Smiling Sid in 1921. This silent film simply depicted Sid Hatfield with several of his followers walking through nearby mine camps, which these mine camps were where people went after they were evicted from their homes and their jobs, effectively tent colonies on the outskirts of town. In many cases, if these people were union members, they were bankrolled by the union. Most of these men and their families were destitute and sickly. So showing Sid Hatfield walking through them as a sort of guardian figure was an effective propaganda piece for the Union. The legend around Sid Hatfield only grew from there as well. Either Sid himself or people around Sid said that he was a member of the Hatfield family, like the Hatfields and McCoys. The evidence for this is kind of shaky, and I'm pretty sure it would have required a child being born out of wedlock, so there's no real evidence for it. But at the time, people ate it up. When a new mayor was elected, a new police chief was appointed, so despite losing his title, Sid was then made a constable. And while there isn't explicit evidence of this besides the fact he would be put on trial for it, it's believed that Sid led posses of union sympathizers in sabotaging anti-union coal companies. There was a lot of coal mine equipment that was being blown up and burnt down, and a lot of them suspected Sid, as you could imagine. And once again, there's no evidence of it, but I think he probably absolutely did that. However, not every development that came out of this shooting, a shooting that would be known as the Maitland Massacre, not all of them were in the union's favor. For one, while the union did everything they could to bolster the public's opinion of Sid Hatfield, coal companies did everything they could to tear it down. Chief among them being his relationship with the mayor's wife. While Mayor Testerman was alive, him and Sid Hatfield were good friends. And while Sid Hatfield was unmarried, he would often go over to the mayor and his wife's home. After the mayor was killed, Sid Hatfield would marry the mayor's now widowed wife 2 weeks after his death. I don't know anything nefarious happened before the mayor's death. And you know, back then, maybe that was just a way of her wanting to live with him so she wouldn't be alone and they were friends or whatever. This is also, I believe, how Sid Hatfield came to own Testerman's jewelry store, as it was transferred to the mayor's wife after his death, who is now Hatfield's wife. It doesn't matter if anything shady went on between the two of them while the mayor was still alive or not, because it was enough for the coal companies to work with. Rumors began to sprout up that perhaps what happened in the gunfight is Sid Hatfield shot the mayor so that he could have his wife. Several of these rumors even made themselves known during Hatfield's trial. Although, as his defense attorney pointed out, that would be absurd for him to want the mayor dead, so he stages a series of events where 13 Baldwin Felts agents show up to perform evictions, and then he gets a warrant for their arrest as some super impractical mechanism to kill the guy whose wife he wants to sleep with. But nevertheless, rumors are sticky, and those that disliked Hatfield had all the more reason to do so. Furthermore, this highlighted some of the tactics that the coal companies were employing.
With the help of Xero's small business accounting software, I've got the right information at my fingertips.
So business is a breeze. And I've got bigger plans. Search Zero with an X.
Welcome to Genesis of Macon, your premier Genesis dealership right here in Macon, where elegance meets exceptional service, featuring the dynamic G70, a luxury sports sedan with turbocharged power, athletic styling, Brembo brakes, and customizable drive modes for a responsive and thrilling drive. Genesis of Macon, where luxury, performance, and service come standard. Visit us today, MaconGenesis.com.
Namely, a man named Charlie Lively, who turned out to be a spy for Baldwin Felts. Charlie Lively lived in Maitland and had a restaurant right across the street from Testerman's jewelry store. It turns out he had been an informant for Baldwin Felts for over a year, outwardly professing to be pro-union so that he could get in conversations with people like Testerman and Hatfield, and then reporting back to the coal companies and Baldwin Felts who to look out for. This meant that even among pro-union members, you had to question who you trusted, which every element of all of that creates a lot of paranoia. This was in a county that, as mentioned, had both union sympathizers and company sympathizers. Well, after Hatfield was acquitted, coal companies decided to double down. About 80% of the local non-union mines began incorporating yellow dog contracts, which, as mentioned, bar people who are getting a job from ever joining the union. And several mines that would previously hire non-union or union members began to fire union mine workers and incorporate yellow dog contracts. So on either side of the aisle, everyone is getting much more entrenched. People are even more steadfast in their resolve. Now they're holding rifles. Stories of small skirmishes or Baldwin Felts abuses or just company overreach made their way through the mountains. And in response, a sort of Cold War began. Now, the first layer of this was destroying assets of the coal companies, as well as destroying parts of the mines itself, like blowing up coal tipples or burning down office buildings. The second order of effect was harassing scab workers. Scabs, or people who worked despite the ongoing strike, were at first encouraged to quit working for the company and then harassed. And if that didn't work, threats were made to keep them from helping the company. It got to the point where the local coal companies were trying to outsource workers. And as workers arrived at the train station in town, union members would be there to greet them and kindly ask them to leave, even offering to buy their ticket home. As a matter of fact, the union was bankrolling these tickets, and in the first 6 months of this strike and protest that resulted after Hatfield's acquittal, spent $14,000 buying return train tickets, which, to put that in perspective, is about $250,000 today. Because of this, would-be strikebreakers would have to try to sneak to work at the coal company. So union members and strikers would set up lines around the coal mines themselves, preventing would-be strikebreakers from making their way into the mines. And yes, this entire situation was exactly bizarre to outsiders as it probably is to you now. However, the man the organization sent, Jonathan Spivak, was there to offer legal advice or negotiation assistance, and that is not the stage the people of West Virginia were at. In a letter back to the president of the ACLU, Jonathan said, quote, "The ACLU seemed under the impression that there is some semblance of legal procedure here. There is not. You can't hold a meeting here, get pinched, and then fight it out in the courts. If you try to hold a meeting in the southern counties, you'll never live to see the courts. This state is a powder keg, ready to blow up any minute." While Hatfield was a constable, the sheriff of Mingo County, Sheriff Blankenship, seemed to be a full union supporter and turned a blind eye to some of the union things that were a bit more violent and perhaps not exactly legal. As far as the greater governments around the county level, no one really knew what to do. It wasn't unheard of for coal companies to call on the federal government to help when a strike had gone too far. Or at least, the coal company says it's gone too far. And National Guard or state police forces had been called in before. But now it was a bit harder to do that. Like, sure, the day of the Matewan massacre, there was a big shootout, but that was over as quickly as it started. Everything that's happened since then has been guerrilla tactics. They're sneaking in at night and blowing up company property, not exactly something to call the military over. Also, at the time, the West Virginia government had no real way of handling it. The state police force had only been created in 1919, a couple of years prior, when Governor Cornwall assembled the group in response to another strike that had occurred. But regardless of the force you have, you can't exactly arrest someone who's as gone as quickly as the deed is done. But regardless, the Union was losing favor with the government in and outside of West Virginia. See, while initially they were sympathetic to the workers' plight and working conditions for coal miners, now there were stories of agencies being shot at and people being threatened if they went to work. When the coal mines would lay off workers for joining the Union, these Union members began to burn down and blow up the company towns. While their patience with the Union isn't entirely gone, as far as the government's concerned, there's a lot of property damage and not a lot of coal being made. Because of this, the West Virginia government began to push back on the more violent strikers. If the state police believed they took gunfire from somewhere, or said they believed they took gunfire from somewhere, they would step in and arrest all of the men within a given community. Most often, these communities were the aforementioned tent colonies. Add to this, reports of Baldwin Felt mine guards at nearby coal companies abusing workers or kicking workers out were still common. And given that the police were arresting people within the essentially homeless camps of the mine camps, the Union sympathizers began to realize the police were not there to help them. If they wanted something done, they were going to have to do it themselves. This led to something in May of 1921 known as the Three-Day War. All up and down the Tug River Valley, strikers began to raid local coal mines. Most of this involved them encircling coal mines throughout the region, and after getting into a gunfight with the local mine guards, entering the companies and destroying a bunch of equipment. For 3 days along a 10-mile battlefront, Union miners fought against the state police and strikebreakers. This was the first time, at least in Matewan, that day-to-day life came to a halt. I mean, even during the Matewan massacre, sure, it was a big shootout for 5 minutes, but then afterwards things went to normal. People went to the store, kids went to school. Not during the 3 days battle. School shut down, store shut down. The only person that was really walking the street was Sid Hatfield.
Just found this unbelievable sequin dress on eBay from a seller who's probably a Vegas showgirl. Then I was craving something sporty, found these in a sick cherry red, authenticated and everything. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, eBay. It's the place for new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion.
Keep all your passwords safe. Choose Chrome to safely store your passwords.
He, heavily armed along with a group of men, would patrol the town waiting for any attack. During one of these patrols, Hatfield came across the superintendent of the Stone Mountain Coal Company. The superintendent was overseeing an unloading at the train station, and Hatfield told him to stop or else he'd be attacked by snipers. So yeah, again, just keep perspective of this whole thing. The constable of the town is approaching superintendent of a huge coal company, saying he has snipers positioned all around, or if not his, he just knows there are snipers all around that will shoot this guy if he keeps trying to operate the company. During the course of the argument, Hatfield struck the superintendent in some way. Superintendent says he was hit with a rifle, while Hatfield said he, quote, just slapped him. Through the midst of all of this, even before the 3-day battle, Frank Keeney and Fred Mooney were doing everything they could to negotiate with the coal companies. But according to them, despite all the violence that was happening, it was getting harder and harder to find a truce. Because the higher emotions got, the less the coal companies wanted to concede any ground. Keep in mind, Keeney and Mooney are the head of the local union. All the strikers are listening to them, and all they want at the negotiation table is things like an 8-hour workday, being paid real money, not dying as much. And all of these are completely unacceptable to the coal companies. However, in the midst of the 3-day war, a more moderate truce for the moment is determined. Martial law will be implemented by the state of West Virginia, and both sides will cool the open conflict. So the police and strike breakers will quit going in for arrests, looking for trouble, and the union members and strikers will quit, blowing stuff up and shooting people for now. Everyone agrees to this, and almost immediately, the martial law just falls into the coal company's favor again. Like, for example, they instituted a weapons policy that only those with permits, something that not a ton of people had, permits for guns would be allowed to carry them. This meant that there were routine checks on weapons that strikers and union members were carrying, and therefore routine gun confiscations. The police said they would do the same thing to the Baldwin Felts members or any of the strike breakers, but they simply never checked for permits, meaning they were only disarming one side of the conflict. So the striking coal miners began to set up weapon stockpiles in the woods. Weapons were traded and positioned in ways for the police to not know. And while they quit shooting each other for a little bit and eventually the martial law subsided, in August of that year, things would get worse than they ever had been. And it began on August the 1st with the trial of Sid Hatfield. During an unrelated trial for some charge Sid Hatfield was hit with, because he got charged with stuff a lot. Like hitting the superintendent of the coal company, that landed him another charge. During an unrelated trial, Hatfield finds out that he's wanted in McDowell County for blowing up coal tipple. Now, McDowell is different from Mingo County because in McDowell, they're not pro-union. And Sid Hatfield had made quite the reputation for himself as a pro-union constable who potentially was blowing up coal company assets. So Hatfield and his attorney called the McDowell County Sheriff's Office, and Hatfield says he will turn himself in to stand trial willingly as long as the sheriff can promise him his safety. The sheriff does, and after Hatfield's initial arrest and then being bailed out, his trial begins on August the 1st. That morning, on arriving in McDowell County, Sid Hatfield was met by Charlie Lively. Charlie Lively being the guy that opened a restaurant next to Hatfield back in Mingo County and turned out to be a spy for the Baldwin Felts Agency. Charlie, who I'm sure Hatfield had no interest in seeing, followed Hatfield around that morning, eventually remarking that he'll see him at the trial. When it came time for the trial, Hatfield made his way to the courthouse along with his friend, Ed Chambers. Ed Chambers was a co-defendant along with Hatfield for blowing up the same tipple. Both of the men were there with their wives, Ed's wife and Hatfield's wife, who is again the widowed wife of Mayor Testerman. As the four of them are making their way up the courthouse stairs, they see standing at the front of the courthouse several Baldwin Felts agents. This on its own isn't entirely unusual. The Baldwin Felts were probably working in the area on the behalf of coal companies, or perhaps they were called to trial as a witness, right? What was odd was that Charlie Lively, the Baldwin Felts spy, and the man who had been following Hatfield around all morning was standing there with him. And little did Sid Hatfield know that two of those agents were two survivors of the Matewan massacre over a year ago, now standing in front of Sid Hatfield once again. As the four of them made their way up the McDowell County Courthouse staircase, the Baldwin-Felts agents pulled their guns and fired. 3 agents, 2 that had survived the Matewan massacre and the spy, Charles Lively, killed Ed Chambers and Sid Hatfield on the courthouse stairs. Charles Lively walking up to Ed Chambers, who was still alive, pushing off his crying wife, and shooting him in the back of the head. At the same time, a 4th Baldwin-Felts agent turned around and unloaded his pistols into the wall of the courthouse, then placing the empty guns on the body of Chambers and Hatfield to make it look like they shot first. Sid Hatfield's wife, Jessie, now widowed a second time by the Baldwin-Felts agency, crying, screaming at the agents who killed her husband, said, "We didn't come here for this." And one of the agents replied, "Well, that's all right. We didn't come down to Matewan on the 19th of May for this either." And the agent's plan for the self-defense play worked. On the same streets that Sid Hatfield had been carried away from his last trial as a hero, him and Ed Chambers were now carried in caskets. The funeral was attended by many union members and strikers. Sid Hatfield was at once